Welcome everybody to my retrospective review thing on Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep Final Mix. This video is focused on the 5th game of the Kingdom Hearts series, basically halfway through the so-called Dark Seeker Saga the series has focused around thus far. Unsurprisingly, this is the 5th video in this series. I recommend either having seen the previous 4 videos I have done if you have an additional 1 to 12 hours free that is, or at the very least be familiar with the previous 4 games before watching this video. While I agree that Birth by Sleep is a great entry point for returning fans and newcomers alike by virtue of being a pretty good prequel, I am coming at this title with expectations and thoughts on the gameplay and narrative as the 5th game in this series, hence my recommendation you at least know the previous 4 videos, or the games themselves. I go through the game in its recommended narrative order, but if you have no prior experience with the games, many of my comments and connections to the previous titles it's setting up will completely fly over your head, so fair warning about spoilers. Birth by Sleep is the second title in this second act trilogy of sorts. The first trilogy consists of Kingdom Hearts, Chain of Memories, and Kingdom Hearts 2. The second consists of 358 Days Over 2, and now Birth by Sleep, the second title in a trio of originally handheld games that help elaborate on events around the first 3 titles, Birth by Sleep being the prequel to Days' interquel. Spoilers for all 5 aforementioned games are all fair game as I hit them. If you want to simply see a playthrough of this or the previous 4 titles without me talking, I have them on my channel for your viewing pleasure, the footage of which is being used here. Otherwise, stick around. This game is a fun one to discuss, being the seemingly fan-favorite title for many of this franchise. Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep was originally a PlayStation Portable title, which was a chest of now beloved JRPGs, and Square Enix definitely put a lot of effort onto the handheld. While the Nintendo DS may have been the more successful system of the 7th generation portables, the PSP was the beefier choice and received a bunch of almost PS2 era graphics with PS1 size world games. This isn't really a jab. If the PSP was, visually speaking, a handheld PS 1.5, then the DS was a hybrid love child between a Nintendo 64 and a PS1. In terms of 3D graphics, the PSP definitely came out on top, and the art style of the Kingdom Hearts series did shine more clearly through the hardware, even if it was pared down slightly. There's no pixelated origami character models on this one. As such, the gameplay wasn't adjusted as much to fit the traditional pick-up-and-play model that Days chose via its mission structure. Instead, Birth by Sleep very much plays like a snappier, smaller, traditional Kingdom Hearts game, with some of the typical handheld concessions. Despite being the second internationally released handheld game in this second trilogy, in all honesty it could have been titled Kingdom Hearts 0, and it might have been given more prominence to some of the audience that perceived all of the handheld games to be non-important spin-off ones, despite some complaints that Kingdom Hearts 2 was slightly confusing without any context of Chain of Memories. But it's a good thing these HD remixes are a thing for that very reason. This is where it benefits being a PSP game in the 2.5 HD collection over Days. Birth by Sleep was infinitely easier to clean up and present it as a playable game alongside Kingdom Hearts 2 in comparison to a DS game, both in their Final Mix editions here. In contrast to how much the Final Mix of 2 added to its own game, the international version of Birth by Sleep was pretty much a solid and beefy title on its own right, so we weren't shafted too much when the Final Mix came out. Similar to the first Kingdom Hearts, we benefited from a 6+ month release delay with more gameplay features and actually got the sequel T Super Boss included in our edition for the first time, without having to wait. Unfortunately, the Final Mix that was announced a week after the English version included an extended secret ending and some minor gameplay tweaks, so here we are bringing everyone up to speed on the HD version regardless. Without further ado, let's dive deep into the 5th game of this series. In usual Kingdom Hearts fashion, Birth by Sleep gives you a choice between the now usual 4 difficulty settings of Beginner, Standard, Proud, and Critical. The descriptors are pretty accurate this time around, including yellow text detailing how much work it takes to earn the secret movie, cutting right to the quick. In this case, the secret movie the game is referring to is actually worth reaching. In lieu of a CGI conceptual tease for a future game, it's actually playable and done with in-engine graphics, so the carrot on the stick here is a much more tangible reward. The difficulties thus have various methods to unlock the secret movie, Beginner requiring a player to fully complete the game, the Sticker Album minigame, and complete 4 objectives regarding defeating essentially 10,000 enemies, 33,333 money, take 100,000 in-game steps, and play for at least 80 hours. This is obviously the punishment/tedious method for playing on Beginner, while in contrast Critical unlocks it automatically after beating the main game. So while the descriptors are generally accurate this time around compared to Kingdom Hearts 2, and I do generally recommend the descriptors on the first 3 difficulties, I caution against Proud and especially Critical if you aren't willing to grind a little bit for vital abilities, since both higher difficulties half your character's attacks and double the enemy's damage. I know some fans don't like how ineffective you can feel when you start out in this game, which is a fair complaint. The flip side is that if you don't mind some tough spots in the beginning and keeping you on your toes during boss fights at virtually any time, you can almost immediately jump into the secret movie on this one, so you do you. This video is running off of a critical mode playthrough, so keep that in mind. Once you have your earliest setting selected, another fancy CGI opening occurs, since Birth by Sleep is essentially Kingdom Hearts 0. Its importance as a prequel cannot be understated, and should sit alongside Kingdom Hearts and 2 in terms of absolute must-plays for this franchise. During some nicely produced visuals and various symbolism abounds set to the Planet B remix of Simple and Clean, a callback to the original title, it showcases glimpses of the Birth by Sleep secret video from the ending of Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. This now fully uncovered trio are the protagonists of this game and the general gimmick of the storytelling this time around. While the first 4 games were generally focused on either 1 or 2 characters, and mostly in chronological order, Birth by Sleep allows you to select any of these 3 newcomers in any order you wish once the prologue is completed, which can be skipped for the other 2 once you've completed a scenario. I will be going in the order recommended by the director and how the game presents its leads, but note you will ultimately get mostly the same experience no matter in what order you choose to play the game in. Once we finally transition into in-engine graphics, the prologue officially begins with us on the friendly beaches of Destiny Islands. A young man with gray hair watches the sunset, offering a familiar-sounding statement.
This world is just too small.
We then transition into the dead of night, an iconic black coat covering an older man with a goatee carrying a white bundle underneath his arm. Crossing a bridge towards the 2 star-shaped fruit trees, the older man sets down his white-covered luggage, the Roxas lookalike closing his vacant eyes as sleep begins to take him. Waking up from a voice within the darkness, not Roxas lands upon a white station, wondering what this other voice is doing within his heart. The light claiming it followed the lookalike's light, the boy claims that it was his light, the camera panning out seeing a broken station, a good third of it crumbled. Representing a fractured heart, never a good sign, the light wishes to help. Entering the youth to join with him, it connects both of their hearts and completes his station. It wishes to assist the youth in regaining the strength to win the other part of his fractured heart back one day, saving him from certain death. Thanking the voice, both entities choose to wake him up, claiming all they need do is
Open the door.
We then visit an echo of an introduction by beginning in a room. If anyone recognizes the opening to Kingdom Hearts 2, they would be unsurprised to see the youth who isn't Roxas waking up on his bed, seemingly from the dream we just witnessed. Looking outside, he catches a meteor shower, rushing outside as the world's title card is introduced. Welcome to the Land of Departure, where all 3 scenarios begin that doubles as a condensed tutorial world, so all those dreading another 2 hours with a Roxas-like youth can breathe a sigh of relief here. This isn't going to happen, since this tutorial light section will last roughly 10 minutes if you aren't skipping the cutscenes framing it and the story in tandem. In this case, our youth is trying to reach a better view for the meteor shower. Along the way, he reaches the training section, helping showcase the main differences in gameplay this time around. In comparison to Kingdom Hearts 2 especially, where the combat was extremely free-flowing and fluid, able to chain various moves together in a combo with various basic attacks, magic, aerial combos, situational moves, and various finishers, Birth by Sleep reins that in a bit. This is more akin to how Days and the first Kingdom Hearts worked. By default, you're locked back to a 3-hit combo, which isn't unusual, but the speed is definitely worth noting. Sora in Kingdom Hearts 2 was agile and extremely flexible in how he can approach a scenario. Not to say that the protagonists of Birth by Sleep are not versatile, but the speed is very much back to Kingdom Hearts rules, where there's a very clear 1-2 pattern of attacks. There's no charging a ground opponent, breaking through their guard, then transitioning into an aerial combo before landing 1-3 finishers here. Normal attacks are very clearly defined and slower for the most part, so you will need to be very aware of how you are approaching enemies in situations, which seems simple enough, but it's more important on Prod and Critical mode, during the first half of the game and for most bosses. You can increase your basic attacks up to 6 with the Combo Plus abilities, but aerial combat is way more specialized this time around, and I will dive into that soon. The game possesses the usual HP bar that loops around your character portrait, and the stat boosts are similar to Kingdom Hearts 2's method of completing certain scenarios, objectives, and bosses to earn them, and the HP is halved on critical mode, so keep that in mind during my footage's pathetic little HP meter throughout. Like Days Enchanted Memories, however, magic isn't governed by magic points, but by the newer deck command system, which is a spiritual successor to Chain of Memories' card-based battle system. While not expressly cards, all combat abilities that are beyond basic attacks are done by slotting in commands, so let's get pedantic and get most of this out of the way here to focus more intently on the story and specific scenarios when the game really begins. To continue on with the introduction a little bit here to save myself some grief, after being taught how to attack, lock on, open chests, and install commands, we will be introduced to the names of our 3 armor-wearing mystery characters. Our Roxas lookalike is named Ventus, our Lingering Will is now known as Terra, and our discarded blue armor lady is Aqua. Needed to get their names out right now, just to make the gameplay discussion flow more smoothly from here on out, so let's get into that before finishing up the prologue. Since we're front-loading a lot of gameplay features, say hi to the command deck. This sticks around the series for quite a bit moving forward, so it's worth breaking down in what ways it's similar and different to the basic Kingdom Hearts combat systems that the 2 main numbered entries codified. Each character comes with a few basic commands and abilities depending on difficulty level, and is a large part on how customizable Birth by Sleep is, and how you can tweak each character to have up to 3 separate decks to select from. Say, for instance, a grinding deck, boss deck, and a normal deck to mess around with different commands and level them up. These can be found, bought, and synthesized throughout the game, and I have a Google Doc detailing some of the easiest ways to earn all of these commands, because the game can be very aggravating in this respect. Put a pin in this, we will return to this niggle in due time. Commands can be categorized broadly in 3 sections: battle, action, and shotlock commands. First, let's cover the action commands, since these comprise of your basic movement actions. Yes, Kingdom Hearts has always been a series about making you earn the right to dodge and even block, so this time they're going to go all in on this aspect and have them even be upgradable. As a side note, you unlock deck command slots as you progress through the game, beginning with 3. 4 if you start on critical for that little extra boost for the amount of hell you're going to be putting yourself through, but you'll max out at 8 by the end regardless. Action commands are given 3 more subsets, the first being movement. Each of our 3 main protagonists obtain variants and even exclusive abilities, but they're evenly spread across the trio and generally operate under the same basic rules. Jump and block are given to all 3 by default, so there's no grinding on a beach to earn the right to block an incoming attack or dodging attacks without a dodge move. As for said evasion moves, Ventus gets dodge roll, Terra slides, and Aqua uses a cartwheel. Terra's got the short end of the stick here, and I'll address that when we get into the differences in battle. Most commands also level up by defeating most enemies, earning command points, such as when you learn high jump via the story and upgrades to blocks and evasive moves, even changing their properties. For example, Terra Slide can upgrade to Sonic Impact, which when triggered after a slide can initiate a second one that pushes aside foes. Ven can change his dodge roll into a damaging Thunder Roll, and changing Aqua's barrier block move into Stop Barrier. A ton of options are at your disposal here if you're willing to customize your moveset, though it's worth noting that changing something like Dodge Roll into Thunder Roll will severely lower the iframes of a move, so keep that in mind going forward. Some exclusive movement commands include Ven having exclusive access to Glide and its super upgrade alongside Reversal, something that was semi-associated with Roxas thanks to the opening of Kingdom Hearts 2 against Dusks. While the boys use basic blocks, Aqua utilizes Barrier, the less OP version of Reflect, but it automatically made me like how she would operate. Her cartwheels are basically more vertical dodge rolls, her barriers cover her on all sides, and looks pretty neat, plus a teleport move similar to Reversal and Double Flight, which is actually a double jump in practice. They all play slightly differently, and it helps a lot when playing a game essentially 3 times to various degrees. The final category are reprisals, which are all counters. All 3 pro tags have a payback counter like Sora had in 2, while each have their own counterattacks for blocks, such as Terra's circular AoE hammer, Van's rush, and Aqua's blast. With how clear-cut all these moves are, you need to be prepared to commit to many attacks when you initiate them. While you are generally slower as the Wayfinder trio here, Birth by Sleep has inherited the amount of options you have in battle from 2, with tons of moves that reward you with both damage and long invincibility frames to abuse if you plan accordingly. The majority of moves you'll be dealing with are battle commands, further divided into attack, magic, item, friendship, and dealing categories. Attack commands are the most common alongside magic, and where most of the equipable attacks go. Everything is reloadable, and runs on a cooldown system instead of AP or MP, so it encourages a small pool of abilities that can be staggered out in various ways to chain in different approaches going forward. Classics like Blitz, Zentitsugen, Strike Raids, and most of your basic magics all return, and you can eventually equip up to 8 commands in a deck, so it's both more limiting and more customizable at the same time, that balance between Sora's expanded skill set of contextual moves with Chain of Memories and Day's more limited focus. It helps add to the sense of progression that most can be leveled up in effectiveness, so you're always filling up a gauge somewhere in this game. More on this in a bit. To balance this further, some of the stronger moves like Ars Arcanum, Deep Freeze, and Mega Flare take up 2 slots, so plan accordingly. All are further classified into Basic, Advanced, and Ultimate classes. This relates to the various recipes in the game regarding this version of Synthesis, and I'll get there very soon. Items also go off of Kingdom Hearts 2 rules, in that you can slot them into your deck, each item maxing out a specific capacity per battle, such as up to 4 potions on one slot, whereas elixirs are limited to 2. This is the usual rebalancing thing going on here, and they are restocked outside of fights, so mostly this concerns boss encounters, and one super boss in particular. Of note are ice creams that are added as a new item type, but at the risk of repeating myself, I shall get to those later. Much of Birth by Sleep systems synergize with each other, so please bear with me for now. Even more special are friendship commands, which meant a lot more back when this game was on PSP and the multiplayer function was more applicable. I don't typically use these, but I'll give them lip service here all the same. Many of these could be used with other players, so they're kind of blocked out of my mind when I return to the game. But the category also applies to illusion abilities, those used by D-Link, and special moves. A lot of nonsense terminology is being thrown around, so let's move on and break those down. Soon to be introduced in-game, D-Links are Birth by Sleep's name for summoning this time around. Short for Dimension Link, it runs off of a new blue meter that, once filled by collecting blue D-Link prizes, can be used to summon various characters the 3 protagonists run across during the game. There are 13 available in total, with a special 14th one held for a specific story moment, that are unlocked as you make your way through the campaigns, the selection of each hero depending on the characters they run into, Terra and Ven the only 2 with a unique D-Link. Gameplay-wise, they're used to call upon a character's abilities they've met during their journeys, an unbreakable connection that I'll clarify when we get back to the story. In practice, once you select which protagonist you'll be playing as for your current file, you are automatically given the other 2 as your first D-Links, so if you stick with Ven, you'll get Terra's and Aqua's D-Links at your disposal. Each D-Link's deck is made up of repurposed commands from the main game, each with their own finisher. They begin as base decks with very few specialized commands, but can be leveled up by collecting D-Link emblems dropped by enemies occasionally when using a D-Link. Once collected, each emblem levels up the selected character's D-Link, allowing access to a passive ability as well as more commands to call upon. If leveled up again, you reach the max rank of 2 and are given a second ability and an upgraded finisher. Each emblem collected afterwards simply fills up the D-Link gauge, as your summon deck will vanish once the gauge runs out or you dispel it manually. You can access the D-Link menu by pressing left on the command deck, and can toggle what characters you wish to show up in the first place from the menu, and which finishers you would like to prefer them use at the same time, which saves a lot of time, so that's a neat touch. In general, I find them fun to play around with. Yet another thing you can upgrade as you play the game, and some of these D-Links can be extremely useful earlier on. Especially for a Proud or Critical Mode playthrough, they'll serve as the free Refill My HP failsafe as long as access to commands you normally wouldn't have access to in your first few worlds, mainly for bosses here. On the highest 2 difficulties, you will absolutely be torn apart with such low HP if you aren't careful, so access to your fellow pro tags will be a helpful boon if you need the safety net. Terra and Ven get the benefit of Aqua's Cure and Autolife commands and ability, and it only takes one mistake to get caught up in a combo and be dealt an instant game over. Overall, they aren't bad mechanically. It's a bit of RNG to get them leveled up if you want a specific ability from them, but that's nothing a little grinding can fix, and a second chance in the form of extra specialized commands and generally powerful finishers isn't a bad deal. Even if you only use them as a free health refill, that alone has its own merits. Like how I dive into a dry form in Kingdom Hearts 2 to top off my health in a boss fight and simply revert back if I didn't have the magic to survive further attacks. To be honest, I forget this option exists during the endgame, simply because by that time the game will have thrown you so many options to utilize, but this is a preferable problem to have rather than extremely limited options, I suppose. Speaking of those other options, Birth by Sleep has the third meter. The so-called focus gauge is what powers up a protagonist's shot locks, specialized crowd control moves that render you invulnerable during and can be fantastic ways to get you out of a pesky or long attack by an enemy or simply clear away a bunch of foes. 9 of these are shared among the trio, while each hero gets 3 exclusive shot locks of their own, including their own ultimate shot lock. They can all be upgraded, which improves how efficient the move is, as well as how fast you can target foes and how quickly it uses up the focus gauge. To initiate, the player need only hold R1 as reticule pops up. Simply aim around towards enemies and attack when you wish. You can still be injured while doing this, however, and you can only use Shotlock's follow-up attack if you max out the targets on each, which vary by Shotlock and what level they are. Each is further divided into classes A through D that determine how to implement the move, from mashing X when prompted, pushing timed buttons, selecting from randomly selected face buttons, or spinning the control stick. These are always generally worth the time and risk in most situations, be it for evading attacks or getting in some rapid attacks when something is stunned or you have an opening, so go nuts. Which brings us all the way back to the command deck. Now that I've explained a bunch of the systems surrounding the combat in Birth by Sleep, it's time to tie a few of them together towards the end here. In general, attacking will fill up the command gauge above the command decks. The usual Kingdom Hearts system is in effect here. X triggers normal attacks while triangle initiates a deck command, which can be cycled with the D-pad or the shoulder buttons. It fills up with each successful attack that connects with a target. If seconds go by without landing a hit, it'll begin to drain. When filled, you can trigger a finisher that initiates whenever finisher you have selected from its menu. This goes the same for D-Links, though they're locked to one of 2 finishers depending on what you've unlocked and which one you've selected once you have both available. Terra, Ven, and Aqua all have their own command tree of finishers, and more can be unlocked depending on various actions. Like a few things, finishers for the main characters can be renamed, but I don't exactly know why. It's nice to see a personalized touch, but it's largely unnecessary here. Anyways, unlocking them can be as simple as defeat X amount of enemies, gain X amount of CP, to simple methods like total steps taken, money collected, or triggering specific command styles. What are those, you ask? Well, as you go further into the game, you are given various command styles that trigger when using specific commands when filling up the command gauge. If you fulfill the criteria for one, your character will change styles, acting as the gameplay substitute for drive forms in a sense. These alter each character's basic combos and increasing their strength, changing their finisher in the process with an extended command gauge to fill. If you continue and don't trigger another command style, your basic attack would change to that of the finisher, and you will exit the style with your basic attacks returned. All 15 command styles come in 2 levels. There are 6 level 1 styles, 3 shared by the trio and a 4th that is exclusive to each. The first 3 shared ones are all based around fire, ice, and thunder based commands alongside their own style, while the 8 level 2 styles are genuinely powerful and usually worth the trigger. They can sometimes drastically change up your movement, which can get you in some trouble in specific scenarios if you don't intend to trigger, say, Sky Climber, with its constant floating that has to let your character drop to the ground to use certain moves, but that comes with the trade-off of a style, I suppose. They're one of the easiest ways to blaze through the mooks you'll be facing throughout the game, and by the end you'll be so overpowered for most basic fights that challenge has largely dropped out of the game outside of special scenarios and boss fights by that point. Not to mention you can extend the use of command styles by simply waiting for the gauge to lower close to empty before resuming the attack, retaining your strength and style if you want to show off how powerful you are. It's all up to you with actual player choice and freedom. I mentioned special ice cream items earlier, and this is where they apply. Once you unlock the ability to make ice cream around halfway through the game, you can go off and collect drops to make various flavors, 8 for each protagonist. Eating one will trigger a specific command style, most useful for boss fights without needing to trigger the style you wish if your deck doesn't allow for it. There's also a chance to trigger the 15th style Frozen Fortune when eating ice cream, so be aware of that caveat if you feel like cheating. I kid. It's an option, but I do my usual thing and typically avoid using items unless early on for potions, until I get Cure like usual, or for a specific super boss here. And with all of that, I've covered the majority of gameplay systems seen in Birth by Sleep. I'll fill in the rest when we get to them, but the game's early tutorial section here in the prologue does briefly skim over a ton of this stuff, so it's easier to get all of that out of the way now, while interjecting with my own usual focus on events and boss fights, rather than doling them out between story sections like I did for Kingdom Hearts 2. Just mixing it up a bit, since Birth by Sleep has snappy gameplay to go alongside a fast-paced narrative, and it's time we return to that. Sorry for front-loading all of this, but it'll make the rest of the video smoother, I hope. Rewinding a bit, we're back to Vanitas in the Land of Departure, heading out to get a clearer view of the meteor shower happening in the night sky. After reaching a scenic view overlooking the main structure after passing through the park-like summit trail, Ven rests atop the summit, remarking how familiar the site seems to be. After a quick nap, Ven's awakened by Aqua. A bit more character-establishing moments occur with nostalgic callbacks to the opening of the first game, with Sora and Kairi. Terra then arrives when Ven asks about what stars are and where light comes from, re-establishing to the audience that each star represents countless other worlds. As the three friends relax a bit, Aqua reminds Terra that their mark of mastery is tomorrow. She brings out 3 good luck charms, star-shaped talismans made after the Palpu fruit Aqua has heard about based on their legend of intertwining destinies. Representing their bond, Aqua says that she worked in some magic on them, making sure that they tie the trio together in an unbreakable connection. This is how delinking is worked into the narrative, so I told you I was covering a bunch of stuff early on for a reason. Some combat tutorials then occur, all of which I've already described save for one: power is found within the heart. I'll cover this later on since it's completely optional, but the tutorial eventually ends on introducing save points and ending the prologue. All 3 go back on home, with Aqua looking up hopefully at their friendship at the stars, before they ominously tempt fate. Meanwhile, Mickey is seen clad in a black outfit, recreating his famous scene from Fantasia. His training stopping for a bit, Yensid warns the mouse of a terrible feeling the wizard is sensing, setting up the stage for the main game. You are now given the chance to select any of the 3 protagonists. The recommended order is what I'll be following here, which is Terra kicking us off, Ven in the middle, with Aqua wrapping up Birth by Sleep. This is done mainly for plot reveals, like I said before. You can play this in any order you wish, but I do prefer how the story divulges information in this sequence, so let's officially kick off this prequel with Terra.
Together. Always.
That would be the last night we ever spent beneath the same stars.
The day of Terra and Aqua's so-called Mark of Mastery arrives, Ven watching from the sidelines as their master presides over the ceremony. This is Master Ericus, a very Japanese-inspired sensei who follows the naming convention of Yensid from Fantasia. While the sorcerer's name is Disney backwards, Ericus is essentially Square backwards of Square Enix fame. As a bonus, he's even modeled to look like Hironobu Sakaguchi, the creator of the Final Fantasy series. Even better still, he was chosen specifically by series creator Tetsuro Nomura to be voiced in English by Mark Hamill, most famous for his role in Star Wars as the main hero of the original trilogy. Nomura is obviously quite the Star Wars fan when glancing at how Kingdom Hearts works in its concept of light versus darkness, and there's even more nods coming up. He introduces the nefarious-looking bald man, who many will have caught from the Birth by Sleep secret ending in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, and the opening of this very game, which heavily splices clips from that infamous CGI teaser. He is addressed as Master Xehanort, and already you can hear the gears turning in many a Kingdom Hearts fan who has paid attention to the last 4 games leading up to this title. If you'll allow me to throw some more trivia in, Nomura also specifically chose the legendary Leonard Nimoy to voice the villain. This isn't really a spoiler, is it? Because of his portrayal of the fan-favorite Mr. Spock from Star Trek. This was Nomura's way to pit Luke Skywalker against Mr. Spock in his own series, and I love it. To think he was pitting Star Wars and Star Trek simply because he could. Must have been a dream come true. Anyways, back to the game. The Mark of Mastery is an exam conducted for capable Keyblade wielders to prove their worthiness of donning the title of Master. Think of this like the Jedi trials in Star Wars that essentially a Padawan takes to reach the immediate rank of Master. Here, Ericus summons multiple orbs of light as targets for Terra and Aqua to defeat, before Master Xehanort subtly corrupts the orbs with darkness. Behaving erratically, they begin to fly around the room, necessitating Ventus joining in to ward off the orbs. While Aqua instructs Ven to take shelter in his room, Terra convinces her that he's been training along with them all this time as well, and all 3 take out the orbs. This is a formality fight, so I have nothing to add beyond this being a good way to adjust to Terra's slow movement and wind-ups compared to Sora. After their victory, Ericus admits the unexpected turn of events were a fitting test, and allowed them to continue, all 3 proving competent fighters. The second phase of their Mark of Mastery involves facing each other in combat. This fight alone doesn't determine the winner, but instead to help reveal deeper truths that the Masters will observe and deliberate. After the duel, Ericus informs that while both are worthy candidates, only Aqua has shown the mark. Turns out that during their fight, Terra briefly showcased some of his inner darkness, something he broods over after the atmosphere becomes much less bright. Panning over to Master Xehanort, he's seen talking with the same masked boy seen in both CGI clips, discussing Ventus, who we won't get much more on here. Taking some time alone outside their home, Terra is worried about his inner darkness. While he acknowledges it resides in him, he also knows it shouldn't matter because he's strong enough to hold it back, or at least he feels he is. Master Xehanort agrees, noting Terra's raw strength and that the darkness is nothing to fear. Rather, Terra should be better off embracing the darkness. While Ericus is averse to any and all darkness, Master Xehanort suggests that Terra will never be worthy of the mark as long as he is Terra's master. When asking Xehanort about what he has failed to learn, Terra is given the interesting response that while darkness cannot be destroyed, it can instead be channeled. Before the conversation can go any further, bells ring from inside the structure, Terra rushing in while Xehanort disappears into a corridor of darkness, the young man meeting up with Aqua as they wonder what's happening. Ericus returns from a conversation with his old friend Master Yen Sid, revealing that while the sorcerer is an ex-Keyblade master, he uses the stars to observe the balance of light and darkness still. He has informed Ericus that the Princesses of Heart are in danger, and that they are in danger of being taken over by darkness and a new threat. This new enemy type is called the Unversed by Yen Sid, who are fledgling emotions taking the form of monsters, as Heartless have not invaded the Realm of Light at this stage in the timeline. As Keyblade wielders, Terra and Aqua are directed by Ericus to correct this imbalance by destroying these Unversed and to find Master Xehanort, who has apparently disappeared. Unable to contact him, Ericus has tasked them to find the Master, restore peace to the world showing signs of disruption, and to protect the light the Princesses of Heart and others represent. Much of this calls back to the rules established in the first Kingdom Hearts. Those who travel between worlds must not let those who cannot know about the existence of various worlds that inhabit the wider world. Before sending them off, Ericus has a small heart-to-heart with Terra, both sharing a bond deeper than that of master and pupil, more akin to a father and son. Terra deeply looks up to his mentor, as seen by how similar he dresses to his master. Framing this mission as the chance to have Terra change his mind, Ericus advises that Terra not be afraid of losing and to curb his insatiable lust for power, no matter how well-intentioned it may be. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, you know the drill. As Terra makes his way outside to the forecourt, Ventus catches up to him, seemingly worried about something. Rustling his hair, Terra assures his young friend that everything will be alright, hitting his left pauldron and summoning his infamous Keyblade armor when he was still known as Lingering Will. Terra then summons a portal leading to the outside of the Land of Departure, throwing his Keyblade and transforming it into his Keyblade Glider, all elements seen in the Lingering Will fight in Kingdom Hearts 2, so nice retention of continuity as far as secret super bosses go. He hops atop his Wave Racer-style glider. He rides it upwards toward the portal and presents the player with the familiar world map screen from the numbered entries. Addressing a few quick lore details before we get going, the method the three protagonists use to travel between worlds this time around are the so-called lanes between, special paths opened by Keyblade masters that connect between the various worlds. Because darkness is stronger in these pathways, Keyblade armor is worn to protect them from any undue corruption. And with that, we're off to the main game proper. Each character begins in a different world, but are then given the chance to select from any of the unlocked ones afterwards, barring narrative-driven events. This is where many will run into the numerous text dumps that help elaborate on all the game's interconnected systems if you delve into any of the options in the main menu, most of which I have already covered so I didn't have to do it here, so let's dive into the first world Terra will visit, Enchanted Dominion. The geometrically based plant life tips off many a Disney fan as to what our first world is. As Terra emerges from the lanes through a portal, his armor dissipating in a flash of light, he runs into his first encounter with the Unversed. This initial fight will introduce a bunch of the basic Unversed, from the Mook Flood to the elemental Red Hot Chili to the bigger Bruiser, most of which shouldn't give many trouble unless you underestimate Terra's slower speed, or if they hit harder on Proud and Critical. That slow-mo finisher will never get old, I swear. Afterwards, you can usually explore the areas you're in, and the usual treasure chests can be found to reward the curious explorer. The puzzle minigame from Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix returns here, instead called stickers that are used to similarly unlock various rewards. You can place stickers in various parts of an album for each protagonist, with points varying on their placement. The max number you should aim for is 7 points each, as this is the only way you can unlock the total 140 points needed to complete the minigame and unlock the fantastic command style and rhythm mixer. The numerous chests and 20 stickers for each character are tracked in the Trinity archives. While there's no explicit character jotting these down, the descriptions are usually pretty entertaining as far as enemy descriptors go, so at least someone had fun jotting down all of these text dumps. Running across Maleficent on her home turf, she questions why Terra is not asleep, as all in the kingdom have fallen asleep thanks to a spell. Deducing that he is from another dominion, an outsider as she puts it, Terra asks if she has seen Master Xehanort. While seemingly denying any relevant information, she points him towards the castle in regards to a man who also wasn't from this kingdom, with the intention of imprisoning the light. A reference to Princess Aurora, Terra makes his way towards her chamber. As he approaches her locked room, Terra demonstrates the Keyblade's ability to unlock any door, finding the princess deep in slumber. Remarking how familiar this scenario seems, Terra turns to see Maleficent noting how Aurora's heart is completely void of darkness, and is one of pure light. When asked why she requires the princess's heart, the Dark Fairy tells a familiar story to those of the first game. When 7 of the purest hearts are gathered, they grant one the power to rule over all worlds. When Maleficent mentions the Keyblade by name as the only method of obtaining these hearts, Terra summons his own Earthshaker and demands to know where Xehanort is. Expressing a bit of her true colors, Maleficent instead begins to taunt Terra about his darkness that she begins to awaken with her power of sleep. Beginning to awaken his darkness, Terra recalls Erica's steadfast stance of pushing back the darkness at all costs before he is hypnotized to summon out Aurora's heart, much to Maleficent's delight. Snapping out of his trance, Terra demands to know what she made him do, the villain claiming she merely whispered to his own inner darkness. As Terra recalls Ben in a similar scenario, Maleficent says Master Xehanort has left into the darkness, asking Terra to join her in gathering the remaining 6 hearts. He refuses, his claim of being a peacekeeper shaken as the castle jolts awake when a large unversed in the main hall of the castle arrives. What follows is the first boss fight of the game in the recommended order, Wheelmaster. Modeled after the famous spinning wheel that plunged Aurora into her cursed slumber, Terra must deal with its large aftershocks and charges, occasionally blocking or avoiding various projectile attacks. As a first boss, it does the job pretty well. Terra's forte is strength among the playable protags, and as long as you don't avoid all unversed fights, he should be dealing competent amounts of damage even on Proud and Critical at this point. If you leveled up either Ven or Aqua's D-Links, you'll be even more ready for this first real challenge. There's not much more to this fight beyond the recommendation to be patient and utilize all your options. His critical impact command style, Ven and Aqua's D-Links, your shot lock, make use of it all. This fight can be punishing on Proud and Critical, so patience is recommended this early on without access to Cure, but potions can very easily alleviate this shortcoming if you're an item user. Wheelmaster can throw its wheel, and Terra can both target this and entrapping him in magical threads to death, so you can target both and eliminate its attack options if you want to dismantle this thing before tackling the main body, but this is your call. Once defeated, Terra returns to Aurora, apologizing for his weak will and heart, vowing to return her light once he learns how to fight back this darkness. Wondering why Master Xehanort would imprison the purest hearts of light, Terra decides to seek out more of these princesses of heart and leaves Enchanted Dominion. Meanwhile, Maleficent notes how her search for these other 6 hearts will take her some time, as it's true she wouldn't gather the 7 maidens for another decade, until she found a way to travel to other worlds and conquer them effectively. When traveling in Dwarf Woodlands, Terra picks up from the earliest point of this tale once again. In this case, the Evil Queen discovers that Snow White is prettier than her from her magic mirror, which then she tasks Terra with bringing back the future princess's heart. He agrees in exchange for asking the spirit of the magic mirror where Master Xehanort is, at which point the player is set off through the dungeons of the castle to find Snow White. In all honesty, I did this in reverse order. Castle of Dreams is meant to occur here according to the level suggestion, but hey, this was done to prove that you can play in any order regardless of choice. The dungeons, consisting of a vault and underground waterway, are filled with unversed and the return of some interactables not really seen since the first Kingdom Hearts, outside of the Cavern of Remembrance in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. Here, cauldrons can be activated through fire-based attacks to fire Terra upwards to reach chests and more unversed. It's never mandatory, but I appreciate the effort in trying to make the levels way more interesting than they ended up being in 2. Days tried this a bit with the recon missions and other scenarios, but considering these early worlds are all new to the series, it does a lot to give the illusion that you're doing more than you actually are. It's also where I kept getting reminded that you can easily die on Critical, so it's worth keeping your eyes open even if you're finally allowed to buy Cure from the Moogle Run hologram shops from your second Disney World on. As you make your way outside and through the courtyard, Terra finds Snow White picking flowers in a glade. Fulfilling his role as the huntsman in this story, he naturally doesn't take her heart, instead asking if she knows anything about a Xehanort. She doesn't, and runs off into the woods once Unversed show up, leading to a fight with those freaking terrible Hair-Raiser Unversed. I may hate monkeys in this series, but these bunnies are a terrible wake-up call on higher difficulties. I complain, but I know it's all on me. Staying calm and utilizing all my options smartly eventually helped me win the day, and you are then tasked with backtracking to the Queen. When you retrace your steps, the Queen, angry that Terra came back heartless, throws a potion onto the mirror once it claims it cannot punish Terra for a slight against her. It then turns into an Unversed, sucking Terra into its dimension where the boss fight for Dwarf Woodlands occurs. It's a neat fight, with simple phases of hit the enemy and dodge the attacks, with more interesting bits of the illusion employed here, such as the revolving clone trick and the spot the real one with a difference thing, which is always appreciated as some form of think about this fight a little bit encounters. If you were smart and filled your deck with 1 or 2 cures, you should be safe as long as you aren't flinging yourself into every attack with your growing stable of commands. Emerging victorious, the Queen begrudgingly asks the Spirit of the Mirror to divulge where Master Xehanort is. It replies that he lies beyond the fells, where war was once waged. Disappointed that's all he gets, Terra nevertheless thanks the mirror and leaves. See, had I done this as my third Disney World, it would have given a more immediate payoff, but for now he stews on the knowledge as I travel to the third and final Disney World in this first batch of worlds. Arriving in the middle of the film's events, Terra encounters Cinderella crying over her dress for the ball that was ruined by her stepsisters. I'm skimming over this since I assume you're all familiar with Cinderella on a basic level, right? Right. Attempting to cheer her up by ruminating on how strength of heart can carry you through the toughest of trials, Cinderella's despair summons more unversed, since they are emotional entities given form. After fighting them off, her fairy godmother arrives and does the thing you'd expect. She's given her iconic ballroom dress, glass slippers, and the works, and heads off to the royal ball. When Terra asks how different of a person Cinderella seemed to be after her kind act, unable to see all the light within her before she perked up, the fairy godmother tells him that sometimes believing in something is all you need, something he takes to heart with his own struggle with overcoming his darkness. He follows her advice and decides to go to the ball in order to gain some confidence in his own beliefs by watching Cinderella. After defeating some unversed attempting to harm Cinderella, Terra becomes her bodyguard and must defend her from the enemies. This is the first escort mission of the game, one that all three protagonists have during these first Disney Princess Worlds in some way, so Cinderella must be protected and not have her damage meter filled. This is compounded slightly by this being a two-stage event. Any damage she takes during the first phase will carry over into the foyer. This isn't a huge deal since Birth by Sleep thankfully now introduces a retry option during these event scenarios, so you don't have to suffer through cutscenes or an entire area to re-challenge the scenario, but it can be unhelpful if you let Cinderella sustain enough damage to retry it in the second section over and over. This is just a side note though. It isn't too bad overall since the game is testing your situational awareness regardless, and you can just restart the whole thing if that happens. Afterwards, as Cinderella begins dancing with the prince while her stepmother and stepsisters look on, Terra sees Unversed above the ballroom and circles around to confront them. Once you reach them, a boss battle against Symphony Master happens. This one's pretty simple all things considered. It has control over 3 instruments that can be annoying to damage you, but at this stage you should have gotten used to Terra's strength and weaknesses and discovered a few commands that you're partial towards. You should have your commands leveled up by now to start dealing some real damage in regards to shot locks, and have adapted the various command styles at your disposal. After Terra's victory, the Duke blatantly lies about one of Kingdom Hearts' fatal flaws as a series. The guests were just starting to enjoy themselves my ass. What guests? The lack of sufficient NPCs really bites this series in the rear-ended moments like this, cause I get it. Birth by Sleep was originally a PSP game, and as a handheld the levels are generally much smaller and the story snappier as a result. But you have to take the good with the bad, and part of the bad for me is definitely the lack of multiple characters, since the worlds not only seem much smaller this time around, but they don't feel completely lived in because of this. Nitpick over, but I had to address how blatant it is when it pans to show nobody around. This will happen again. Moving on. Cinderella and the prince have their moment, while Terra asks the Grand Duke how long they've had problems with the monsters. He answers that they have only recently begun appearing, shortly after sightings of a boy in a mask began popping up, giving Terra something to go off of. Midnight occurs and Cinderella runs off, leaving behind her perfectly fitting glass slipper as the prince's only hint as to her identity. On his way out, Terra runs into Aqua, and the two catch up a bit. Aqua informs Terra that Ven ran away from home presumably to find him, to which Terra was unaware of. Regretting not hearing him out when he left the land of departure, Terra fills in Aqua that while he hasn't found Master Xehanort, the Lost Master is apparently seeking out hearts of pure light. She decides to stay behind and find more clues, Terra directing her to the prince to assist her, asking if she has the same dream. Terra reinforces his reignited belief in himself thanks to Cinderella, asking Aqua to give her his thanks if she sees her. His thoughts dwelling on the masked boy that seemed to lead the Unversed leads Terra to seek out Master Yen Sid to gain some further guidance on these matters. Arriving at the mysterious tower, Terra witnesses none other than Mickey Mouse rushing out with an object that sends him flying haphazardly into the sky. Terra's nonchalant response here always cracks me up. I'd imagine most wouldn't be so calm seeing a sentient mouse fly off into space, but this is Kingdom Hearts, let's be honest. That doesn't even rank in the top 10 weirdest moments you'll see in this series, or will see. This world is essentially a 3-room location once again. While the outside is explorable as it was in Kingdom Hearts 2, it's more used for story moments where all the inner staircases present in 2 are absent. Once inside, Terra greets Master Yen Sid, the sorcerer expecting him about his inquiries on the Unversed. While Yen Sid reiterates that he's no longer a master, Terra asks about his pupil who just ran off with a Keyblade in hand. Yen Sid explains that while Mickey is a kind and just king, he has also not fully outgrown his rash decisions to help those in need. He has thus run off with a star shard in the hopes of helping out. When Terra asks what's wrong with Mickey's assessment, asking what he can do about Master Xehanort's disappearance and the masked boy controlling the Unversed, Yensid suggests that both are connected. Despite him not wanting to assume the worst, Yensid is showing concern and some knowledge as to Master Xehanort's dark intentions. While on his Keyblade glider in the lanes between, Terra is contacted by Master Xehanort, asking to see him at once. Landing in the familiar-looking Badlands, Terra confronts the elusive Master and asks about his actions throughout the 3 Disney Princess worlds thus far in his search for the light. Master Xehanort claims that his actions were all in an attempt to safeguard the light from a demon that he apparently unleashed upon the worlds. He says that the boy in the mask, named Vanitas, is a creature of pure darkness that came from Ventus. The Master recounts that Ven succumbed to darkness during training, and the only way to save him was to separate the boy's darkness from him, creating Vanitas in the process. This explanation is enough to satisfy Terra, as the events seem to correlate with how he first met with Ventus. Around 4 years ago, Master Xehanort arrived with an expressionless Ven, presumably after the incident that stripped him of his darkness. After Xehanort came to Ericus in order to leave the boy with him, feeling it wouldn't be right to remain his master after dealing him such harm, Terra introduces himself to Ven. After asking him a few questions, Ven breaks down and begins to yell, holding his head in pain, and freaks out Terra and Aqua as the boy seems to pass out. Ericus informs them that Ven cannot remember anything about the incident, and we return to the present, Terra satisfied that most of what Xehanort has told him appears to be the truth. Only one more question bothers him: why Vanitas is still free after so many years. Asking if he has escaped Xehanort after he was created, the Master agrees, something the audience doesn't really believe for a moment, having seen the opening. While the player is left wondering how much of this tale is true, Xehanort implores Terra to hunt down and destroy Ventus's apparent darker half, as an abomination without hope of salvation. I love these lines. The Master suggests that if Vanitas' goal is to disrupt the light, Terra should head towards the familiar City of Light, Radiant Garden. Touching down, the audience seeing a fleeting glimpse of Ventus, Terra defeats them Unversed in the central square, further lending credits to Xehanort's story. Terra then sees Master Xehanort head off towards the eastern part of town. Terra runs into Merlin along the way, the wizard dropping the familiar book that houses the 100-acre wood. Apparently not one of Merlin's, he recognizes the book seeming to be radiating with power to strengthen any who read it, something the wizard welcomes Terra to pursue. This unlocks the 100-acre wood for the command board, and I will address this completely optional minigame later. Back outside, Terra must navigate around a fountain court and aqueduct while chasing a large Unversed. Eventually finding himself at a reactor, Terra runs into Ventus and Aqua, all three having chased down their own Unversed and has now formed into one unified enemy. This Trinity armor continues the loose trend set by guard armor of a boss encounter that is made up of smaller parts. Enjoy this 3-way battle. The protagonists don't team up together too often as you've seen. Trinity armor can hit pretty hard, and being caught up in a combo can very easily result in the game over if you're like me and don't have any abilities equipped. More on this very soon. If you can focus up and dodge its myriad of attacks on all 3 parts, including lasers, fireballs, and electricity, plus pretty unfair berserk states, all 3 will eventually come out the victors in a satisfying cutscene having all 3 protagonists defeating the monster. Ven celebrates by giving Terra and Aqua lifetime passes to Disney Town, another little reference to Disney Park passes. While Aqua suggests Ven return home, the youth refutes this by saying that the guy in the mask is toast, Terra latching onto this information, also telling Ven to return home thanks to the danger Vanitas now presents with his apparent link to Ven. When Terra says they have a dangerous task ahead of them, Aqua chastises Terra's actions in the previous worlds, saying that he shouldn't be cozying up to darkness this frequently. Accusing Aqua of being ordered to spy on him by Master Ericus, Terra storms off, angry and hurt that nobody seems to trust him enough to journey on his own. As he leaves the aqueduct, Terra concludes that Master Xehanort is the only one he can fully rely on since he isn't doubting him at every step. Terra is then approached by a very familiar looking character, this time brandishing 2 working eyes and claiming to be holding Master Xehanort captive as a prisoner. Terra doesn't believe the thug's threat, but follows his instructions that he's holding the Master captive in the Outer Gardens. This is where I will briefly explain where I grind in this game. Once you have access to the aqueduct after Trinity armor preferably, you are now in the position to gain every ability in the game through command melding, the name for Birth by Sleep's version of synthesis. The key to these are the annoying Mandrake Unversed that throw out long-range floor-crawling attacks. They have abounding crystals, the last of the 7 basic synthesis materials that grant various abilities. Melding involves mixing 2 commands together in order to form a new one, and these materials attach to specific combinations that grant various abilities. I have a guide linked that saves a ton of time on this, as this is where I typically take 2 to 3 hours grinding out each ability for every character. This admittedly leaves me overleveled for the remainder of the game, but abilities are a necessity for Proud and Critical unless you're a god at evasion and blocking, which I'm not. It goes without saying that super bosses all but require the essentials to survive single hits, and combos that once more and second chance provide, but you do you. I'm simply saying at this point that you can save yourself a bunch of hassle if you're willing to grind for a bit. This may not be necessary for the lower levels, where the enemies don't hit nearly as hard, but I'm not here to tell you how to play the game, only what I do and how I made the second half of the game much less of a grind for me. Melding is the best way to get some of the best commands in the game, and while the game does help you with this with various recipes you obtain throughout the title that show the results of specific levels of commands, this is the internet, just go online and look it up. Use my guide since it has to be more useful to someone out there. I typically grind up the necessary commands and their attached abilities, then make a separate file that I resume whenever I come back to replay Birth by Sleep to save me time, like I did here. It's a weird method, I know, but that's why I'm suddenly much stronger in my footage here and in my playthroughs, so my advice can still semi-apply to the critical paths here for all three heroes, but just know that I'm going forward assuming you have most, if not all, abilities from this point forward. This saves me a bunch of time and has me constantly unlocking abilities and getting even stronger through the second half of the game, so do what you want. At least look up how to get the essentials. Once more, second chance, the HP and cure boots, attack and magic haste, the speed of the reload times, defender, the combo pluses. Look at a list and decide what's best for you if you aren't going to get them all for a proud and critical playthrough at least. With all that out of the way, let's return to the story. Once at the Purification Factory underneath the Outer Gardens, Terra witnesses Master Xehanort chained up, apparently proving the familiar antagonist right. Returning fans will recognize this as Xigbar's somebody, Braig, who is implied to have been torturing the Master for a bit here. When Terra demands to know what Braig is after, he says it's all about the Keyblade. After speaking for the audience in a very self-aware line here, Braig says Xehanort filled him in on what a Keyblade can do, saying he also said Terra was Keyblade Master material. Braig assumes that if he can defeat Terra, that will prove he's more worthy of the Keyblade, something Terra brushes off as nonsense, knowing Keyblades are very particular about their wielders. After Terra charges, Braig warns him that if he approaches any further, he'll blow up Xehanort, keeping the young man at bay deflecting Braig's attacks. At least Braig acknowledges that he isn't a match physically against a Keyblade wielder. After a few minutes, Master Xehanort yells at Terra to fight back regardless of his well-being, Terra's mind filled with righteous vengeance, Braig shrugging at his failed bluff. As a battle ensues, Braig behaving very similarly to Xigbar in Kingdom Hearts 2. He can warp around firing shots, leaving himself open to reload his arrow guns, and pulling off the first-person targeting move that requires Terra to dash around to avoid his attacks. No reaction commands to counter this time around, though. He's not too tough with the appropriate abilities equipped, and a cure or two aside some stronger commands if you melded them. He just takes patience as the mid-game skill check. While Terra whittles off Braig's HP, the Keyblade wielder fires off 2 blasts of darkness at the gunslinger, scarring his cheek and eye while freeing Master Xehanort. Terra is horrified at this unleashing of his inner darkness, succumbing to it as he did when he took Aurora's heart. Master Xehanort suggests that he can join him as a pupil instead, since Terra is convinced that he cannot return to Ericus while he embraces this darkness. Xehanort suggests that there is nothing to fear, claiming Ericus is blinded by the very light he so slavishly defends, and that light and darkness should be balanced equally. Xehanort further suggests that Terra should continue his quest alone, as Ventus and Aqua's light are too bright and would hinder Terra's growth, as the Master suggests that Terra already shows the mark of mastery, further feeding the young man's desire to prove himself as a real master. Terra agrees to seek out Vanitas as Xehanort addresses him as master, Terra setting out with newfound purpose. Outside, Ven catches up with Terra, asking to join him. Terra declines, knowing that Ven will be there when Terra truly needs him. Both friends leaving on good terms, Terra summons his armor and leaves Radiant Garden. Before we follow him, Braig returns bandaged and angry, firing off multiple bolts at a quiet Xehanort. Furious he wasn't told he'd be injured, the Master summons his large Keyblade, backing off once Braig reconsiders his scratches, happy his heart wasn't stolen like Terra did to Aurora. Xehanort claims that Terra possesses too much light still and is incapable of taking hearts, leaving Braig to wonder what Xehanort knows as the audience is left wondering what Xehanort's true motives are with playing to Terra's insecurities and desires. Entering the second half of the game, speaking from each campaign's point of view since Radiant Garden is the midway point in all 3 stories, you are now directed to Disney Town, replacing the 100 Acre Wood as Birth by Sleep's main minigame world. Each protag is given one of the 3 main minigames in the town to partake in, and Terra's deals with rumble racing, Kingdom Hearts' version of a racer. Witnessing Unverse on the racetrack and almost being run over by Pete, who is going under the moniker Captain Dark here, he is convinced by Queen Minnie and Chip and Dale to enter a race to combat the Unverse threat. This is an attempt to allow Terra to see that he can accomplish accomplish his goals while still following the rules, and thus rumble racing is a thing. I'm a huge fan of Mario Kart, so needless to say I have what some may considered a very high bar of quality I expect in this sort of gameplay. Granted, this is a minigame in my hack-and-slash action JRPG game with anime characters fighting alongside Disney characters, but if you're going to make it mandatory, then make it good. Luckily, rumble racing is fine. It's passable. Not spectacular since it's not as tight as I'd like it to be, but it's perfectly playable. Sure, it suffers from terrible and cheap rubber banding at times, especially for the first 4 of 5 laps here, so my advice: play as you normally would, taking the shortcut, using the brake to adjust your turns, avoid the tornadoes, and don't sweat it if rival racers keep passing you. They tend to stop cheating in the final laps in my experience, so as long as you avoid the tornadoes and attack enemies when given the chance without missing boosts or guards, then you should be able to win without much trouble. I will address the other minigames during the other campaigns, and later on in the multiplayer hub, so for now, just accept the win. Terra takes this as a learning experience, feeling more confident that he could still approach his goals without relying on the darkness within him, since he shares the struggle that Riku did post-Kingdom Hearts as the Atoner. Terra is told about the Million Dreams Award that the town is currently enveloped in, but in this order we won't see the end result of this for now, so like all of Terra's storylines in this world, put a pin in this and we'll return to this later on in Ven and Aqua storylines, as we move on to the more traditional combat-centric Disney worlds. Olympus Coliseum returns for the 5th title in a row, much to the annoyance of many a Kingdom Hearts fan, but it's back to being more of a dedicated world of pure fighting with no long tournaments this time around, so never fear if combat was somehow the reason you dreaded this world instead of having it return in every game thus far. Personally, I feel it's only shown up this much because it doubles as an easy way to have RPG-friendly combat scenarios to work narrative-wise, but this time it actually does serve a purpose narrative-wise as it did in Kingdom Hearts 2. It's back to being a 4-room world, but this time it features young Herc, one of 2 Disney worlds that actually uses their film's younger versions of its characters to show it's a prequel if fans somehow didn't catch on yet. Hey, I'm doing my best to prop up this place, alright? At least we have a town near Thebes to fight some unversed in. It's no underworld, but they do have another chance to outdo this in a few games. Anyways, Terra comes to the aid of young Herc, who found himself overwhelmed by the unversed. Impressed with Terra's strength, Hercules mentions the games being held at the Coliseum, Terra taking this opportunity to test his strength while he's here. While Herc runs off to train more with Phil, we are reintroduced to the reason I swear Olympus Coliseum shows up so often: Hades. Following a few linguistic jokes in typical Hades fashion, i.e. fast-talking car salesman of death, he eyeballs Terra as the dark, brooding, and moody hero he is. Promising a method to conquer the darkness inside of him, Terra allows Hades to sign him up, as he keeps rubbing shoulders with all the Disney villains, so why stop now if you can potentially get something out of it? The usual matches against Mooks takes place here, Terra emerging victorious and awaiting his final match. He is presented with a helmeted young man familiar for starring in another beloved PSP Squeenix JRPG 2 years earlier. This first match is a cakewalk, before facing Hades' plan Beta, the mysterious soldier clearly possessed by darkness given to him by Hades. Pretty standard Final Fantasy boss fight here. The narrative reasoning is that Hades is trying to show Terra the power that he could have if he simply opens up to his own brand of darkness. Terra helps his opponent break free of his control, the fight being tougher thanks to increased attacks and combos, which is why once more is almost a necessity on the higher difficulties if you get caught up in one. After the battle, the soldier introduces himself as Zack, fan-favorite protagonist from Crisis Core, which itself was a PSP prequel to Final Fantasy VII, focusing on other characters as well. The game again pulls the look at the invisible NPCs that are totally watching this lie, as Zack hopes to one day fight Terra on a level playing field and looking up to his strength as a fighter. Our next Disney World is the second one to reinforce that we're in a prequel. While it's called Deep Space, 99% of the level takes place on the Federation ship from the opening scene from Lilo and Stitch. While glancing at his Wayfinder, Terra encounters countless jelly shade, giving the player a moment of catharsis as you can fly around your glider plowing through them. Enjoy the moment, for eventually Terra is sucked into a tractor beam into the main ship itself. Locked in a cell until the authorities know what to do with him, they are then chased out as Unversed invade the ship, Terra using his Keyblade to break out of his cell and defeat them. Afterwards, Dr. Jumbo Jukiba congratulates Terra on his strength, requesting Terra free him so he can also rescue his illegal genetic experiment, numbered 626, who was jailed and set for banishment for being too powerful of an entity. Sympathizing, Terra agrees as they set off to rescue the aliens somewhere on the ship. You can explore much of the Turo prison block, using Terra's various movement abilities and specific commands to explore other cells and loot various chests for goodies. All optional of course, but at least they put in some effort to reward exploration here. Terra dons his Keyblade armor to transfer to another side of the ship, defeating someone versed in the ship exterior if you wish. The launch deck and control room have gravity switches that can lower the force to allow for higher jumps to reach more difficult to reach places, while causing some objects and chests to float and sometimes block other paths, so experiment away while avoiding the laser turrets. Terra and Dr. Jumba eventually encounter the titular alien, known initially as Experiment 626, imprisoned in a containment pod. It snatches Terra's Wayfinder after it's freed, the Keyblade wielder alarmed at how much he still values the trinket. Saying it represents the bond he has to his friends, 626 drops it, confusing Dr. Jumba as 626 was designed with an instinct to destroy everything it touches. Claiming 626 isn't aware of a concept such as friendship, he summons Experiment 221, Sparky, to do battle with Terra. This fight is obviously electric-based, and Sparky can possess the turrets during the battle, but otherwise this is a standard end of a world fight. Afterwards, 626 returns, seemingly curious about Terra's link with his Wayfinder. Introducing himself, 626 says Terra's name back to him, as the Keyblade wielder claims he cannot accurately describe friendship to him. Before anything more can be said, the ship is put on red alert as Dr. Jumba and 626 run off, Terra deciding to leave the world. He dons his armor and tells himself that he will eventually set things right with his friends once he tracks down Vanitas and proves himself a master. Rounding up the final Disney World, we now finally get to explore Neverland itself. Not a ship, not the islands surrounding it, but actually Neverland. How I built this up since the first Kingdom Hearts video makes it seem like this was a long-time dream come true for me. Honestly, I just kind of find it funny how we didn't actually get to visit the world Peter Pan spends most of its runtime on until the 5th game in the series. Well, it's technically its 4th representation if you count Chain of Memories. It still has some of the best music in the series, and it's one world that's had different themes in each of its 3 incarnations on the world. At least I appreciate the music. Touching down, Terra defeats some unversed hassling Captain Hook and Smee, naturally meeting the villains once more. Asking if the pirates have seen Vanitas, Terra hears of Hook's troubles with a boy after the light in Hook's chest. Curious on who it is if it's not Vanitas, Terra becomes a makeshift bodyguard for Hook to defend against Peter Pan. They set off to Skull Rock, which requires traversing most of Neverland to get there. Pretty straightforward stuff if you don't choose to explore. You'll eventually reach a boat to Skull Island, where Terra awaits Peter Pan, Hook running off after hearing of Smee's fixation on a shooting star that might just be a precious gemstone in disguise, leaving Terra alone in the cave. Peter Pan eventually shows up for a fight against the Disney protagonist. That is pretty uncommon even for this series. Peter's not too difficult to find at all, especially if you've got a powered up shot lock, since you only need to knock off about half of his HP before the fight ends as Terra realizes that the light he was defending for Hook was simply a bunch of pirate treasure. Continuing the trope of being used by Dark Alliance villains, Terra apologizes to Peter Pan as he tells him about going after a shooting star, leading Pan to fly off in regards to Tinkerbell. Before he leaves, the jellyfish unversed return, so go wild here. There's really no wrong strategy when the room is filled with dozens of the little buggers. Afterwards, Hook returns with a captured Pixie, which Terra promptly frees. Before a second fight seems to occur with the pirate, Hook runs off at the sound of the crocodile, Ting's pixie dust reminding Terra of the night he shared with Aqua and Ven before his Mark of Mastery. Treasuring his simpler times with friends, Terra tells Pan's men to put important items with beating into the chest instead as treasure, wondering what he'd put in there as he leaves. While traveling through the lanes, Terra is drawn to a warm light in a nearby world. Touching down on the familiar beaches of Destiny Islands, Terra runs across a Palpu fruit, the star-shaped fruit Aqua based their wayfinders on. As he walks up toward the Palpu trees, Terra expresses worry at how he seems to be drifting further and further away from his friends, hoping the light that brought him here will give him some further answers. While crossing the bridge, Terra is passed by none other than Sora and Riku, adorable child versions of their future main series protagonists. While Sora spots Terra and continues off to do his own thing, Riku sticks around, immediately claiming Terra's from the outside world. The sharp 5-year-old assessing that Terra's not from the main island as nobody lives on this personal playground. Saying that they were here thanks to his friend's dad because they aren't allowed to row here on their own. See, Sora did have 2 parents at one time. I wonder what they think of their son missing for over a year in the future. Terra probes as to why Riku seems to be curious on worlds outside of his own. Riku proceeds to tell a tale of a boy who once left the islands long ago, and assumes the boy who left must be really strong by now. Terra glimpsing a vision of the boy who left Destiny Islands, who we saw in the beginning of the game, before seeing the teenager Riku would become. Sharing this young boy's determination to grow stronger to protect his friends, Terra initiates a bequeathing ceremony with Riku, passing on the power to wield the Keyblade when the time comes. Swearing Riku to secrecy, Terra looks on as Riku remains coy with the curious Sora, Terra reaffirming his determination that he still must protect his friends as well from Vanitas. Terra then leaves, being bestowed his Ends of the Earth Keyblade fans are more familiar with. Keep this in mind for later. While leaving the islands, he is contacted by Master Xehanort once again right after seeing a light in the sky, deducing that it's Ven. Meeting up with the Keyblade Master in the Badlands, Terra is told that Ven has discovered the truth about Vanitas and his origins, rushing off towards the land of departure with fury in his eyes. Quickly following suit to prevent Ven from doing anything rash against Master Ericus, Terra returns to the land of departure to a shocking sight. His master begins attacking his younger friend, Terra blocking the chains of light just before they reach his friend. Asking if Ericus has gone mad, his master demands he step aside, Terra refusing. With tears in his eyes, Ericus sadly claims that all his attempts to reach Terra have failed, and that they both must share the same fate if he won't obey. While Ven agrees with Ericus, Terra is having none of this as he throws Ven into the lanes between to calm down their master. The boss fight begins with Terra in the Dark Impulse command style, clashing against Ericus' ability to charge himself with Burning Light. This plays out like a sort of samurai duel, Ericus able to block and counter basic attacks, so use this chance to showcase your mastery against an opponent with similar abilities to Terra. After the battle, Terra is horrified at turning his own Keyblade against his own master, Ericus blaming himself for the darkness within Terra. Regretting turning his weapon against his own students, the moment is cut horrifically short as Ericus is struck down from behind, the Keyblade Master falling forward in Terra's arms as he then fades into fragments of light, leaving behind a distraught Terra and his Keyblade. Master Xehanort reveals himself to be the murderer, claiming that for all of his attempts, Terra refuses to fully embrace his darker impulses. Egging him on, Master Xehanort calls out Terra to meet him where all Keyblade wielders leave their mark on fate, the Keyblade Graveyard, so infamously seen in the secret endings of Kingdom Hearts 2. Summoning a dark orb that begins to destroy the Land of Departure, Xehanort leaves Terra behind, the young man watching as his home is left to its destruction, the endgame in sight. Here, the Badlands are renamed the Keyblade Graveyard, and is the final area of the game. Before this, however, I'll quickly go over the multiplayer hub world of Birth by Sleep that takes over Olympus Coliseum's usual duty of housing challenging phases of fights. Originally the multiplayer portal in the PSP original, it could always be played as a solo venture, which was necessary to complete the game at least on Terra's side. To unlock the game's secret ending, one has to collect all 13 of the Xehanort reports divided across the 3 heroes' campaigns. One of Terra's requires a player to complete a specific battle, so I might as well cover it here. You can adjust your character's Keyblade armor to whatever color you wish. I simply push Terra's red value while I do the same for Ven's green and Aqua's blue because I'm boring. Here, the Mirage Arena offers 3 basic categories: Arena Mode, Command Board, and Rumble Racing. I've covered the third option, and this is where one of Birth by Sleep's major criticisms is justified. To fully platinum this game, if you care about 100% completion, you need to beat this game a minimum of 3 times, completely. Among that, you need to do even more than you'd expect, as no progress carries over between the 3 protagonist stories. To unlock further ranks in the Mirage Arena and open new challenges in the Arena mode, you will be required to do everything here, meaning you will have to do the Command Board and Rumble Racing. To unlock the Rumble Racing tracks, you need to have unlocked them all in Dizzy Town before you can challenge them here again for the points to count. This means that you will need to race most of the tracks a total of 6 minimum attempts to unlock the super bosses for each of the 3 characters if you want to 100% those Trinity archives. To add to my own personal hell, I've done this on the PSP original game, my imported copy of the final mix for PSP, some of this was done on the PS3 version for the 2.5 HD remix there, and now I have done some of this for this PS4 version here. I have done this stuff so many times, so forgive me if I'm harsher on it than it already deserves to be, but I won't apologize for this. I know it's my fault that I'm a completionist, and I know I'll eventually do this all again for the 4th time, because I hate myself. Anyways, the fights. I showcased the Copycat Crisis and Villain's Vendetta fights in my most recent playthroughs, since they offer all of the Mirage Arena exclusive Unversed fights. The former showcases the 2 exclusive Unversed bosses. First up is Mimic Master, which fights very similarly to Xexion in his use of a book to swat you around, and even call your character to fight against you, albeit with pitiful HP. It can also fire laser beams of light and darkness, the latter which can inflict darkness, so be aware of that annoyance. Overall, it's not too difficult, especially if you've melded powerful commands or at a high enough level at this point. The more interesting and annoying exclusive Unversed boss is the various forms of the Iron Imprisoner. This thing is first fought in its first form chained up, seemingly restraining its power, which is utter and complete nonsense. Don't mistake me, the fight's relatively simple here, but it does get progressively worse. Its second form has its arms free and brandishing a spiked hammer, and you now have that and its shockwaves to contend with alongside fire-based attacks. The third form has it completely free and is much faster with its long and damaging attacks. Iron Imprisoner 4 is the final and worst incarnation, as it's able to send a cage after you like its previous forms can, but this time it's on fire because why not? It can also warp around the stage, attempting to suck the player in to damage them in its unlocked state, and can completely disappear for a while and throw parts of the background into the foreground, damaging the player as it uses the time to make you waste any and all progress you may have had command style-wise. In general, shotlocks are your best friend here, as well as my favorite go-to move and potentially cheap method of using Fire and Thunder Surge for damage, move, and avoiding damage, as you're invulnerable for the majority of these 2 attacks. You do you. This thing is cheap and I don't blame you for any effective strategy you find. The Villain's Vendetta mission is framed as a boss rush of sorts of all the previous Unversed bosses as well, so you'll only lose time if you die here before you get to defeat Iron Imprisoner 4, which did happen to me before recording this footage, of which I wasn't pleased. On a happier note though, winning this fight will unlock the ultimate Keyblades for all 3 heroes, so it's not for nothing and only bragging rights. The Keepers of the Arena match also grants each character's ultimate shot lock. In Terra's case, this is the ultimate cannon that Lingering Will used on Sora in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, so it's satisfying to blast away enemies with a big-ass cannon yourself. Other matches leading up to the tougher fights can also unlock various bonuses for all 3 characters at different stages. These range from HP bonuses to Terra's aforementioned Xehanort report, and even exclusive Keyblade, to a command style for Ven and Aqua, so you'll get some sort of tangible rewards if you subject yourself to doing this for each character. Speaking of, it's time to address another particular super boss while I'm here with Terra. One of the additional fights Final Mix added to Birth by Sleep is the Lights Lessons match. This is a super boss, and so you better bring your best to the table here, as your opponent is the Armor of Ericus, a data simulation of the now slain Keyblade Master's Will donning his full Keyblade armor. Turns out he earned his master rank if this fight is any indication of his full potential. Ericus' armor really packs a wallop here, as well as adjusting his fighting style for each character, including a different limit style move. Against Terra here, it focuses a lot on powerful strikes. The strongest attack has it chaining Terra up as the armor lifts a chunk of the stage into the air and then slams it back down as a meteor attack. You can mash X and then dash to the other side to escape all damage, so you can think of it as a break if you aren't angry it completely drains any command style that you are using. It appropriately speeds up against Ven, tending to throw the player into the air and is capable of using reversals when attacked. The limit this time around consists of summoning 2 giant tornadoes which can be easily dodged. More on this when I cover Ven and Aqua, detailing why Terra has it the hardest when facing these super bosses. Against Aqua, it will similarly charge with a barrier against her, the limit this time around using one of her exclusive shot locks against her, Prism Rain, which also deals status effects on contact, so avoid that. Otherwise, the Armor of Ericus is a challenging, long, but fair fight against their shared master. Thankfully it and other bosses are toned down a little bit in the 2.5 HD remixes, since multiplayer isn't an option this time around, but they will still eat you alive if you aren't at your best. It will fire off lasers, light-based flames, chain other protagonists to siphon off power and power himself up to do a cheap 1-2 instant KO that counts as 2 attacks if you aren't careful, so once more and second chance won't save you if you're caught up in that move more than once. Besides that one move, the fight is overall fair and is a good test before the other 2 super bosses that really will test your mettle. The reward for the lengthy battle is a meager HP increase, but at least it grants an exclusive battle theme that slightly rings with sadness now that Master Ericus was literally backstabbed. Or backshot. They had to zoom in because it would have pushed the rating, no doubt, depicting that sort of cold-blooded murder in a Disney game. Just know Ericus was a badass in his prime. I'll address the 2 other Final Mix editions later in the other campaigns, but for now let's return and attempt to avenge the death of their master by heading off to the Keyblade Graveyard. This area is the final world in each campaign. Turns out the secret ending of Kingdom Hearts 2, and by extension the opening of Birth by Sleep here, were both depicting the climax of this game. With the fated events left to transpire, each character begins in the seat of war, looking over a barren wasteland with giant craters, one even forming a hidden Mickey. Some chests are lootable here, with the second area appropriately named Twister Trench. The titular phenomena, if caught up with, will send you into a void to face one of a few preset battles with Unversed. The third and final area is the Fissure, where the final save point and Moogle Shop are located. Once you're ready, march on forward for the climax in the third area. Finding himself in the midst of the crossroads made up of various discarded Keyblades, Terra is greeted first by Aqua. She begins by informing Terra that she was told that Master Ericus was slain, something Terra admits he stupidly helped accomplish thanks to Xehanort's manipulations. While Terra admits that he went astray but is now determined to remain steadfast, Aqua solemnly admits that she believes he will once again get caught up in his anger and rage, as well as the darkness within him. When asking how that would avenge their master, Ventus approaches, claiming Xehanort wants him and Vanitas to fight for some type of Keyblade, the subtitles tipping off the attentive that something new just popped up that they aren't aware of in terms of what Terra's story experienced. Before the player is given a chance to wonder what this means, Ven asks his friends to put an end to him, to prevent that from occurring, Aqua and Terra reeling in shock at the request. Right on cue, the trio look down one of the crossroads to an approaching Master Xehanort, Vanitas appearing from within him, the events of the secret ending coming to life. Xehanort shows them the numerous lifeless Keyblades that are epitaphs for the numerous wielders who lost their lives in search of an ultimate key. This prompts the rest of the events depicted in that CGI trailer. Terra charging and being foiled by Master Xehanort's supreme power over magic, Vanitas riding a tornado of Keyblades to attack Aqua and Ven, Aqua losing her helmet, Ven being frozen alive before being thrown off a cliff, Aqua catching him as they all look on as Xehanort summons a blue Kingdom Hearts above them. Even Mickey makes a brief appearance before we finally cut to events beyond what's been teased. Resuming with Terra's perspective, he charges above to Xehanort on his glider, the Master congratulating him on his journey between the invisible wall that divides light and darkness. Reiterating that he did indeed split the darkness from Ventus to create Vanitas, Terra angrily charges both antagonists. You can choose which one to focus on here, since once you drain the HP bar of one of them, I decided to choose Vanitas for story purposes since you never got to fight him during Terra's storyline, the scene will continue. Fending off Terra, Xehanort tells Vanitas to take what Ventus owes him and to kill Aqua. This causes Terra to roar in a blind rage, vowing to avenge his master, whom he refers to metaphorically as his father. He fully embraces the darkness within him, allowing it to empower him as Terra is allowed to go mono-a-mono with the Keyblade Master. Xehanort can fire off powerful magical attacks, but he's worn out by this point. It doesn't take much to stunlock him with some commands if you're proficient at a few of them. Xehanort can still raise the ground beneath Terra, firing off all three elemental magics and can summon his Keyblade Tornado as well as warping around, but this isn't the real fight. Claiming he's truly won despite collapsing atop his Keyblade with ragged breath, an explosion occurs behind them, Terra turning around to see a giant column of light. Exclaiming that the Keyblade has been forged, Xehanort extracts his own heart, determined to survive and witness what lies beyond a Keyblade war, directing his heart towards Terra and intending to use the youth's darkness as a new vessel. Instinctively summoning his Keyblade armor for protection, it is seemingly a futile gesture, his armor crumbling around him, the character emerging with white hair and an infamous speech to those familiar with the ending of the first Kingdom Hearts.
This heart belongs again to darkness. All worlds begin in darkness, and also end. The heart is no different. Darkness sprouts within it. It grows, consumes it. Such is its nature. In the end, every heart returns to the darkness whence it came.
This reveal is something a few of us in the fanbase predicted, but it was still a great moment to witness, picking up on all the clues. Before any more information can be processed, Xehanort begins to walk away, summoning his own Dark Keyblade before being surrounded by chains of light. Turning around, Xehanort comes face to face with Terra's newly reformed Keyblade armor in a familiar pose, infused with Terra's lingering will in a pure, unadulterated fist-pumping moment for me. As the information banner claims, it's time to defeat Xehanort and take back your body. Xehanort here possesses many of Terra's skills, including Sonic Impact, R Solemn, Quake, and Dark Volley. He will attempt to counter and dodge many of the more effective damage-dealing moves, such as Shot Locks and any Mind Commands, but he's not immune to damage, he's just smarter about avoiding it. After Lingering Will knocks Xehanort out, the chains keeping them enclosed dissipating, its cape returning in a completely extra move as well, because continuity. In all seriousness though, the capes were removed from the game because the processing to calculate them was something that the PSP couldn't handle in the multiplayer mode with a maximum of 6 players. It returns in Flashy Faction here for the 2.5 edition, and it makes me smile because I would have preferred them to return for the entire game, but at least they gave me this moment. Kneeling back down, an expanding ball of light begins to engulf the graveyard, swallowing Xehanort. As it reaches the Lingering Will, Terra's memories of Ventus and Aqua keeps it rooted there, everyone else vanishing as the solitary suit of armor is left beneath the pale blue light of Kingdom Hearts. Slowly, the clouds begin to cover the sky, the last rays of light ending above Lingering Will, Terra vowing to set things right to his friends as he remains where it is seen when Terra encounters it a decade later. The credits roll as Terra's journey abruptly ends on a downer. Get used to that. Birth by Sleep attempts to outdo Days' depressing ending with each passing scenario. I'll address all these plot ramifications and lore things in the later lore section of this video, but for now enjoy the few answers you did get from Terra's story and keep in mind the new questions that arose. We're now going to go back in time to cover events from Ventus' point of view with Terra's knowledge in mind, so let's try to go back to happier times before this all occurs again.
Aqua. Ven. One day, I will set this right.
Skipping over the prologue this time, since I front-loaded this video with much of the gameplay and similar story sequences on top of the story being virtually identical at this stage, Ventus and Aqua storylines are going to seem very quick in comparison to how I set everything up with Terra. We return to the day of the Mark of Mastery, this time focusing on our Roxas lookalike. While waiting on the sidelines, Ventus notices Master Xehanort glancing his way. As an audience, we're now fully expecting to see what parts of Xehanort's story was true this time around. The exam occurs, with Ven jumping in to help in the first trial, allowing the player to get used to a more Sora-like character compared to Terra, since Ven's forte is all about speed, including the ever-helpful dodge roll. Once Aqua is named Master and Terra walks off to be alone for a while, Ven returns to his room thinking about how best to cheer his friend up. Meanwhile, Master Xehanort meets up with the masked boy, asking his assessment of Ventus, the mysterious Keyblade wielder unimpressed. While playing with a wooden Keyblade with Terra's name etched on it, the masked boy arrives in his room once the bell begins ringing. He advises Ventus to catch up to Terra, since soon he will leave him behind and become a different person, these words meaning way more to us now. While Ven believes in his friendship with Terra, the words still eat at him, the masked boy remarking how Ven's never left the lands of departure. Remembering some flashbacks with his times with Terra, whom he obviously sees as a big brother type figure, Ven runs outside to see Terra. Reassuring him everything will be alright, Terra summons his Keyblade armor and glider, riding off through the portal to the lanes between. With a sudden stroke of inspiration, Ven decides to hit his left pauldron as well, amazed at his own set of armor and throwing his Keyblade in a similar manner. Riding atop his surfboard-like glider, Ven rides off into the portal, chasing after Terra and beginning our second perspective. Ven's first stop is Dwarf Woodlands, this time starting in a completely new section of the world compared to Terra's visit, which is a common theme to Ven's visits in the first half of Disney Princess Worlds. He sees the dwarves outside their mines, and when trying to befriend them and ask if they've seen Terra, they run off and claim him a jewel thief, leading him to chase them and calm them down. This will be a good section to readjust to the change in movement and abilities, including Ven's more speed-focused style, Fever Pitch. On Proud and Critical, you'll be dealing virtual chip damage in the beginning here, but it's compensated with how invulnerable you can be if you constantly use dodge roll, a big advantage over Terra. You must find all but Dopey, so enjoy the relatively game-over-free section. Once all are found hidden in crates and minecarts, Ven decides to leave, directed by the dwarves to others in the area, Doc pointing him towards a castle beyond the forest. Running across the dwarf's cottage in the woods close by, Ven hears a scream, running across Snow White in the woods. Calming the scared maiden down, they introduce themselves as Ven's escort mission begins, protecting her on their way to the dwarf's clearing. Turns out Snow White wasn't tripping balls as seen in the movie. These trees actually do attack her, blowing wind menacingly at her while on first attack. This may seem more difficult compared to Terra on higher difficulties, but Ven's speed and ability to quickly defend Snow White if close by during attacks gives him a good counterbalance to the wide open area compared to the narrower corridor in Terra's file. Once she's safe and with the dwarves, Ven checks back in as Snow recollects her time earlier, how Ven rescued her and she got lost in the woods. Mentioning how she ran across a man with a key-shaped sword, the dwarves jumping to conclusions that this man sent demons after her, Ven anxiously enters the woods to prove them wrong, running into his first unversed boss. Mad Treant is a more involved fight than the Wheelmaster, able to throw out its fruit as bombs, produce poison puddles, and can even shoot out fireballs, among close melee attacks and sending roots to appear underneath Ven. Keeping in mind you have D-links, command styles, and at least one shot lock, plus the hint that dodge rolling continuously can protect you from virtually every attack if you need to, this is a good first test as any for Ven. After the fight, Ven makes his way to the Flower Glen, running across an old lady who drops a red apple. Unwittingly assisting in what will be attempted murder, he returns to her the red apple as she remarks on seeing that sword before. She claims that Terra threatened her with his Keyblade after demanding where Xehanort went, confusing Ven and causing him to leave the world to further search for his older friend. Ventus arrives in the Castle of Dreams with a drastically new perspective. Shrunken down to the size of a mouse, he's found by Jacques and Cinderella caught in a trap, replacing Gus from the film. It makes Cinderella come across as a bit odd, since she can understand Ven just fine as she can Jacques' mouse Latin, but she doesn't seem to recognize him as a miniature human. I don't know, the game doesn't explicitly explain this, it's just amusing to me. It's welcome since it's completely different from Terra's campaign earlier, since Ven's entire gameplay takes place in the chateau. This is earlier on in the film, where the mice are creating a dress for Cinderella and must gather items to make it. Nice, simple goal for Ven to explore a new area with. It's limited to only 3 rooms, but the verticality and numerous nooks and crannies helps with the focus on exploration for the 5 items needed. Cinderella's room is a safe area to explore a bit while learning one of the environmental gimmicks present, which is a ball of yarn. It helps to assist Ven in reaching higher areas and chests, as well as batting away enemies quickly, so make of it as you will. The mass hole is the most involved area, involving various forks doubling as springboards and knocking across blocks of cheese out of webs and pushing matchboxes to create platforms to progress through to the wall around the wardrobe room. Once all 5 items are eventually gathered, Jacques tasks Ven with going after a pearl, causing Ven to face off against his first Disney boss, Lucifer the Cat. This fight is half attacking, half waiting, since he can jump around extremely quickly being a cat. I wasn't able to trigger the reaction command in this fight this time around, but it is possible to right atop Rucifer and eventually attack with Bronco Strike, but even if you don't, it's not too difficult of a fight if you let him come to you. Afterwards, Ven saves Jacques and the dress is then made, surprising a Cinderella who isn't even remotely looking at the castle here. I know this is the ultimate of nitpicks, but this is like when characters look at fellow characters on a TV screen, as if that's how TV screens work, if it's not a one-to-one giant screen with giant monitor, but ignore me. It just adds to how ditzy Cinderella comes across to me, not questioning the little teenager who's able to also talk with mice. As Jacques asks Ven about what his dream is, since they help Cinderella accomplish hers, Ven thinks back on his, Terra and Aqua's shared dream of becoming Keyblade Masters.
I just need to keep on believing.
Enchanted Dominion rounds out Ven's Disney Princess Worlds, picking up not too long after Terra's own visit. Witnessing Aurora sleeping and being filled in on events from the 3 good fairies Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather, Ven insists on helping retrieve her stolen heart from Maleficent's castle atop the Forbidden Mountain. Immediately starting the player in front of the cursed fire that blocked Terra from exploring beyond the glen, Ven's gameplay deals with infiltrating the castle while being opposed by Maleficent's goons. Most of the exploration's pretty standard fare. The hall is what requires some basic maze clearing tactics, using various colored portals to warp around the room, until eventually reaching Aurora's heart held captive in Maleficent's flames. Using his Keyblade to free it, Ven is shown brief glimpses of Aurora's memory of being with the prince before she was cursed, a sign that she has gotten her heart back. The fairies, remarking on how Ven also seems to possess a strong light, they head back where Maleficent confronts them in her throne room. Remarking on how he must be Ventus, Maleficent claims that Terra had been here earlier and assisted in taking Aurora's heart. Ven vehemently denies the accusation and a battle ensues, despite Maleficent remarking that she was to leave Ven unharmed. The fairies will help Ven during this fight, as Maleficent can conjure up a casting of sleep. To counter this, Ven can help charge an attack with the 3 fairies that not only protects him from Maleficent's spell, but can also trigger Joint Force after a timed QuickTime event to reflect the magic back at her instead. This usage is one of the few times I'm okay with QuickTime events, clearly telegraphed button prompts that you yourself trigger and aren't randomly activated during what you think is a freaking cutscene. They're fine when being used to trigger attacks or as cinematic finishers like this, not when they're used to punish a player with an instant game over. QTEs are tricky things, and you'll never have everyone agreeing on how to use them, but in general, Kingdom Hearts doesn't abuse the feature. Heck, they tend to be very forgiving compared to other franchises. It's also a very Squeenix thing to use them to pull off the cinematic moves that they've been chasing ever since Advent Children, and Kingdom Hearts is a perfect fit for this type of wish fulfillment. Reaction commands were similar. They simply weren't called QTEs and only required one button instead of mixing it up here in Birth by Sleep, and often didn't require any timing. The fight is otherwise unremarkable. Maleficent tries to send out various Sleep and Thunder-based attacks, but Ven will come out the winner. Afterwards, Ven still worried that Terra could do such a thing, Aqua arrives to console Ven about the true nature of their friend. Oh, how tragic all this setup is now that we know Terra's fate. You can't say it wasn't being telegraphed sufficiently enough, even if it wasn't one of your theories going into Birth by Sleep. As Aqua informs Ven that she was tasked with bringing Ven back by Master Ericus, the youth thinks back on the Master's warning about Terra. Worried, Ventus refuses Aqua's request, determined to find his best friend before anything can happen to him after hearing of all the disturbing acts he's supposedly done. Ventus spots the masked boy once more in the lanes between, chasing him down to the familiar Badlands area that the Lingering will inhabit for over a decade. Ven demands to know what he meant by Terra becoming a different person, the boy insulting Ven as he brandishes a Keyblade of his own, the two doing battle. The first phase doesn't require any finesse whatsoever, since you aren't meant to win this section of the fight. Ven is then showed being overpowered by the dark-helmeted youth and is about to be finished off, evidently going against Xehanort's orders, when Mickey shows up to heal and assist. This section of the fight is for real. Ven can team up with Mickey periodically to use the Burst of Faith reaction command by mashing X. This not only prevents any damage from Ven's darker half, but also expels a light-based attack that deals a decent chunk of damage, where on Proud and Critical you'll be chipping away for a while to do any decent amount of hurt. Otherwise, abuse dodge roll as you wish while learning your opponent's attack combos, since he can warp around when attacked and attempt to backstab you, so stay wary. He tends to leap into the air to fire off electricity at Ven from a specific distance, and can now send a slow ball of fire that can split into 3 homing flames, so abuse your iframes during a dodge roll and take Mickey's help whenever offered. Eventually, Ven and Mickey will stave off the antagonist, the boy laughing and considering Ventus on probation. As he slips into a corridor of darkness, Ven and Mickey properly introduce themselves, both sharing their actions in choosing to go out on their own without permission from their respective masters to help out those in need. Bringing out his Star Shard, Mickey says that while he can think of a place and it'll take him there, he admits it doesn't always work as intended, frequently sending him flying whenever it wants. Just when Mickey hypothesizes that it might instead be reacting to something, like say the riders need to get into a specific place, it activates, sending both into the lanes. Then spots Radiant Garden and touches down, marking the first half of his story almost complete. Ven continues his trend of the Sora in this tale, running into most of the protagonists and generally doing good deeds, and Radiant Garden is no exception. Spotting Mickey heading towards the western part of the town, Ven travels through the gardens, so be aware of the mandrakes. They've got a ridiculous range, more annoying in this area than in the aqueduct, and can lead to a quick game over if you aren't careful. Once he makes his way to the front doors of the large castle in the middle of the town, Ven is blocked by 2 familiar-looking gentlemen when they say they haven't seen any visitors. Proclaiming the castle closed and about to face off with a large unverse that appears before them, Ven runs off instead, the 2 guards about to give chase when another familiar-looking scientist shows up and tells them to stand down and protect the castle during this time. Evan calling them back to meet with their lord, the scientist's keen eyes notes that Ven will be fine on his own, since he seems to possess a heart stripped clean of darkness. Back at the central square, Ven runs into Scrooge McDuck as he protects him from the passing unversed. Scrooge thanks him, recognizing him as a fellow world traveler, giving him 3 lifetime passes to Disneytown for him and 2 grown-ups. Ven then runs into Merlin, who invites him to read the book containing the 100-acre wood to help power him up. This relates to the command board, so pin this one again. Eventually, Ven will retrace Terra's steps across the Fountain Plaza and the Aqueduct to meet up with him and Aqua once again to face off against Trinity armor. The same strategy applies here against the 3-part Unversed, with the same fleeting relief of fighting together, soon being soured when Aqua reveals that she was sent by Master Ericus to not only spy on Terra, but also to take Ventus back home. Terra angrily storms off, Ven claiming that Aqua's recent promotion to the rank of Master has gone to her head. Shaming her in a moment that many seem to think comes out of left field, they aren't totally wrong. I remember chuckling at how easily he was blaming her for just apparently doing her job here, and instead goes off looking for Terra to join with him after proving he could hold off Vanitas earlier. We head back towards the central square as I switch to my grinded up file with all abilities on their way to being equipped. Ven finds a young child being attacked by Unversed, defeating them, and is then approached by Evan calling out the boy's name. He thanks Ven for rescuing the orphan Ienzo, who appears quite young compared to Ansem the Wise's other apprentices. Curious. Ven then asks if Evan's seen Terra, who is pointed towards the outer gardens while feeling they're destined to cross paths again. Ven remains confused, but returning fans will know. Ven indeed runs across Terra right after his battle with Braig, declining Ven's offer to join him in his journey to find Vanitas on his own, while Ventus returns to tell Aqua about how Terra still seems like the friend they've known for years. Back in the central square, Ven finds Aqua looking quite worried, demanding Ven return home and concerned for his safety. Dejected that both of his friends want him to return home, Ven is swinging around the wooden Keyblade, recalling a past memory. After a sparring session back when Ven first joined them, Terra performs a mock bequeathing, reiterating their shared dream of becoming Keyblade masters. Back in the present, a young boy with a familiar spiky red hairdo challenges Ven to a duel, his other familiar blue-haired friend watching from afar. The briefest of battles occurs, Ven handily defeating Lee as Isa chastises him with friendly banter. Leaving, Lee tells Ven that they're both friends, telling him to get it memorized. As Ven contemplates on the simpler days when friendship was much easier to define, Isa asks what Lee's obsession is with making sure everyone remembers him, even complete strangers. Lee responds that in people's memories, he can become immortal, the two looking on towards the castle where their fates would be determined in the future. With all of these cameos out of the way, Ven is the last to leave Radiant Garden, entering the second half of the game and roughly halfway through this entire narrative. The second half of Worlds are suggested in the same order for all 3 heroes, they simply arrive at different times as you'll see. Ven's presumably the second to land at Disneytown, startled by Pete's new moniker of Captain Justice. Out to rescue the local citizens thanks to the Million Dreams Festival, Ventus hears Huey, Dewey, and Louie having trouble with their ice cream machine, Captain J running off to assist. Before that, however, I'll actually address Disneytown itself as a level. It consists of 5 main areas that house the 3 main minigames during the festival, alongside 2 large underground areas to explore for extra bonuses, one of which I fetch for Ven at this time. Descending through a manhole, the Gizmo Gallery is full of gears and giant gloved hands to present platforming challenges. To activate the room, thunder-based attacks must be targeted on a gauge, as simple as throwing a thunder and triggering the Thunderbolt command style. This gives you access to Pete's Rec Room, where a giant pinball machine is located on the wall. The controls here are sort of wonky and floaty, but there's nothing at stake here but bonuses. It can be completely ignored, so do as you wish. Once you reach the outside, you'll be on the highest point of the raceway. Off in the distance, you can spot a platform that the game presumes you'll use glide to reach, but I'm that kind of player that thinks I can outdo the intended sequence. If you played around with any of the slide commands, you may have noticed that they rocket you forward no matter your elevation, so if you, say, stack 2 of them, you can actually reach this corridor without the need of glide. Instead, you'll automatically snatch Super Glide. This is a big boon for speed and traversal purposes once you level it up, so I save a bunch of time and recommend any Ven player do this when reaching Disneytown. Saves you a bunch of time as you pump all the CP you earn into the second round of Disney Worlds to have a fully leveled up Super Glide by the end of the critical path. Once that's finished, it's time to go back and see what the trouble was. Turns out the ice cream machine that their Uncle Scrooge left them needs fixing, and it somehow relates to Ven participating in a rhythm-based minigame. I know I had PTSD flashbacks from Atlantica as soon as I saw this, but this game is much better for a few key differences here. First off, the controls are always point at a duck, press X when it tells you, meaning the QTEs in the Kingdom Hearts 2 version won't spring up on you, even though this wasn't really an issue given how easy that minigame was anyways. But it does still get better. One song you're required to do is It's a Small World, and who doesn't know that song? Even ironically, it's not hard even if you somehow don't know this song, since there are now difficulty settings, and the first tier is always set to easy. I think you'll have to try and fail on this one or be extremely uncoordinated. It's a game of Simon Says. The game demonstrates what you need to do before you get to do it, so I don't know how anyone can fail this if they give it an honest attempt. After the success, the triplets throw in their vote for Ventus, and this unlocks the ice cream minigame thing across the game. You can also find special unversed found tucked away in corners on each world for every character that drops ice cream ingredients to take back here, and unlock the ice cream items that trigger specific command styles. It's not necessary at all, but it's just one more thing to do that really packs Birth by Sleep with content, despite how brisk it is if you slow down and take your time. Ventus leaves Disneytown and arrives in Olympus Coliseum, finding a very distraught Phil hiding from Zack, who's begging to be trained by the Trainer of Heroes. Before anything else can happen, the four are attacked by emotional monsters, which all three handily take care of. Afterwards, Ven learns that the games are about to start and that he can't join in as Zack took the last spot, Phil using this opportunity to decide who he trains, which worries young Hercules. Ven offers to train with the demigod, and the two break the vases training minigames occur. This isn't too difficult if you abuse how OP the barrel rolling move is, since all you need to do is run over things to win. Between sessions, Ven learns about Herc's lineage and how Phil signed up both Herc and Zack in the West bracket to face the heavy-hitting contender they have in the East, the winner set to fight in a head-to-head match. The game thankfully montages the fights you aren't playing in, which is kind of refreshing, as Ven watches Herc and Zack begin to fight as he sees Aqua and Terra in their match. Before things can really get going though, Unversed are attacking the town near Thebes, Ven rushing out to make sure that they don't gatecrash the games and ruin the match. Countless emotional jellyfish are the target this time around, Hercules jumping in to help his friend, foregoing the match. You can team up with Herc here, the demigod able to spin Ven around and around, and then launch him into any of the numerous Unversed in your way. I can't always seem to nail the move here, but it's more to have fun, since you should have a pretty powerful shot lock at this point in the game, plus any styles you should be triggering on top of that. No matter how you go about it, you'll defeat the Unversed threat just as Zack arrives, everyone wondering now how they'll determine what to do about the match everyone forfeited. Phil arrives to give the movie's adage that being a hero is more than just brawn, proclaiming Herc the winner for being the first to act like a hero. Undeterred, Zack introduces himself to the other heroes in training, all three set on their dream of becoming real heroes. Ven's appearance has helped reinvigorate Herc's drive, Ven deciding to continue his journey knowing he's made more friends outside of his small world. In the lanes between, Ventus encounters a giant space jelly Unversed, introducing the glider battle controls as Ven attempts to do battle with the giant creature. Before he can strike a fatal blow, it retreats towards the Federation starship, Deep Space's title card showing up in one of the slicker optical illusions the series has had for these logo transitions. Experiment 626 is shown recaptured by Captain Gantu, who leaves when the alarm sounds at another intruder. 626 escapes as Gantu runs across Ventus, telling him of the monster he was chasing, both setting off to handle the situation. Before Ven can leave, 626 enters, calling Ven by name and mentioning Terra and Aqua alongside a friend circle of his own. After fighting his way through the ship's corridors, defeating all and first along the way, Gantu runs across 626, destroying his makeshift Wayfinder, throwing 626 into a blind rage. It joins up with Ven in the machinery bay to take out his frustrations against Metamorphosis. You can team up with 626 for a reaction command, something I also wasn't able to trigger for whatever reason here, but aside from floating around the arena, this fight isn't too difficult no matter what option you choose. After the fight, Gantu storms in on a sad 626 as Ven realizes the Wayfinder is broken. Leaving the ship before they're captured, 626 jacks a red ship and triggers hyperdrive, blasting him off to the opening of Lilo and Stitch while sending Ventus careening into space, ending the storyline here since Terra and Aqua were present before Ven. We then transition seeing Mickey on Neverland before coming face to face with Vanitas. Leaving that plotline for now, Ventus wakes up with Tinkerbell about to kick his face. Dodging, he introduces himself to Pan's men, Slightly and Cubby, before they set off to find a shooting star Tink saw earlier. Tagging along, Ven joins them and eventually meets up with Peter Pan in his hideout, who directs them to instead go after Hook's pirate treasure. Annoyed at the boys' short attention spans, Miss Pantyshot is determined to go after the shooting star, Ven following her lead. Arriving at the Indian camp as Ven spots Mickey's star shard, Tink is promptly captured as Hook shows up and holds her ransom at Mermaid Lagoon. Ven's determined to help out the procured pixie and informs Peter Pan of her capture after defeating someone first. As they make their way towards Mermaid Lagoon, Hook's ship will fire cannonballs towards Ventus, in both a blessing and a curse. Tink returns trying to catch Pan up on Terra on Skull Island, but constant cannon fire has Pan going after it to stop the ship while Ven heads to Mermaid Lagoon to head off Hook. This is normally where Tink will share her pixie dust and allow Ven to glide, but if you broke sequence and got super glide earlier, you'll simply laugh at it and mark off the new notification. Once at the lagoon, Ven will face off with Hook in a proper boss battle, the crocodile circling the arena to help keep him in place. Hook remains the capable swordsman he's always been, still throwing out explosive presence and capable of berserking occasionally. He's particularly prone to fire-based attacks, and the sheer amount of options, namely Wingblade if you can activate it, means this fight is in the bag. Slightly and Cubby return with an empty treasure chest with Terra's earlier suggestion on putting what they treasure inside instead. Ven joins in, leaving his old wooden Keyblade keepsake, tempting fate even more, claiming that their best memories are ahead of them. Ven requests Tink give back Mickey's star shard, which she reluctantly returns before it triggers in a flash of light, then vanishing from Neverland and sending him on the path to the endgame. On the front steps of the mysterious tower, Donald and Goofy are worried about their missing king before Ventus arrives before them face down in the dirt. Spotting Mickey's star shard, the two rush in to meet Master Yen Sid and derive word the mouse is gone. The magician welcomes Ventus, aware of his situation and how he ran off without telling Ericus, something Yen Sid is lax on, since Mickey has trouble following similar directives. Presenting the star shard, Yen Sid derives Mickey's location in the Badlands, Ven recognizing the location. On the ground and wounded, the connection is then severed, Yen Sid declaring that a dark and powerful force is interfering with his magic. Goofy and Donald are raring to go rescue their king, but Ven tells them to stand down, feeling he owes Mickey and must rescue him without putting his friends in more danger. Yen Sid agrees, and Ven sets off to the lanes towards the Badlands. Upon landing, Ven rushes over to Mickey, turning around to find Master Xehanort. In a sudden pang of remembrance, Ven begins to recall what he has lost on that fateful day 4 years ago, realizing it wasn't a dream he had when this journey started. Xehanort then proclaims that Ventus is meant to clash with Vanitas to create the all-powerful Keyblade. Questioning alongside the audience why it's spelled that way, Xehanort elaborates that the Keyblade is spelled with the X-shaped letter Key, which can also be pronounced Kai, though it means death regardless. Fueling Ven's questions why Ericus never allowed him to leave the land of departure despite his various requests, the youth decides to confront his master about this, where we will finally get the context of this confrontation. Unsure of himself, Ventus is greeted by a relieved Ericus, confused that Aqua isn't here alongside him. His mood is shifted when Ventus accuses his master of imprisoning him on this world for 4 years, Ericus rubbing a scar as he recalls a prior event with Xehanort. Reiterating that the precepts bar them from learning about the Keyblade, Ericus asks why Xehanort is fixated on the ancient legend and why he wishes to cover the worlds in darkness. Xehanort counters that darkness did cover the world once in the legends surrounding the Keyblade War, claiming it was a beginning rather than an end, since the precious light of Kingdom Hearts was found amidst that crisis. Seeing Xehanort is willing to essentially trigger an apocalypse to satisfy his curiosity on what lies beyond the Keyblade War, Ericus turns his Keyblade on his friend, the two briefly doing battle as Xehanort fires 2 darkness blasts, giving Ericus his 2 facial scars similar to how Terra scarred Braig. Alarmed at the darkness having consumed Xehanort, Ericus resolves to stop history from repeating itself, determined to prevent the forging of the Keyblade. aiming his Keyblade at Ventus and willing to destroy him to prevent a larger disaster, Terra jumps in and the events occur as we've seen earlier. Ven is then thrown into a portal as Terra begins his fight with their master, waking up on an empty Destiny Islands. About to summon his glider, Vanitas appears behind him, readying his Keyblade as he assesses that Ventus is strong enough to fulfill his purpose, as it were. Ventus refuses, claiming the Keyblade can only be forged if they fight, so he simply won't. Ventus then remembers the events of the training incident. It turns out that Xehanort was pushing Ventus to his limit, making his pupil face Neo Shadow heartless, then not strong enough and unwilling to embrace his darker impulses. Xehanort then takes matters into his own hands, extracting Ventus's darkness, only afterwards realizing that he may have irreparably damaged Ventus beyond hope. The boy's inner darkness forms into a dark orb that produces what Xehanort names Vanitas, masked and still without a face to identify him, proving Xehanort's tale to Terra is very much true. Vanitas then claims Ventus will fight him, as he intends to go to the Keyblade Graveyard with the intent of choking the life out of both Terra and Aqua. Knowing his lighter half won't be able to stand idly by, Vanitas disappears into a corridor of darkness, Ventus angrily vowing to stop his darker half and set things right, unsure of how to avoid forging the Keyblade as the Keyblade Graveyard appears in the northernmost area of the ocean between. Of course, it's time to deal with some endgame events and super bosses now. This time around in the Mirage arena, I'll focus on a fight I found personally satisfying. Selecting the Monster of the Sea route will have you squaring off in a very recognizable innards of a certain intergalactic whale. Dealing with the unversed inside the stomach will eventually launch your character out through Monstro's blowhole, finally giving you 3 minutes to lay the smackdown on this particular Disney antagonist. The second phase takes place outside on a small spit of land surrounded by various pieces of driftwood with explosive barrels around the arena, with one popping up on the small island for the player to smack around. These are meant to be thrown at a circling Monstro's eye, since enough of the explosions will stun the whale of a whale, leading for a giant-ass target with a chance at uninterrupted attacks. Monstro can otherwise send tidal waves at the player, since characters cannot attack within the water itself, and can briefly belly flop atop them, fly over them, and slam his tail, all of which can be abused. This is slightly boosted in difficulty on your first fight with the whale if you aren't equipped properly for the 2-phase fight. While the first phase is as simple as defeating all the unversed inside, the second is timed to 3 minutes, before the player is then swallowed up again by the whale to then go through phase 1 again, this time with more of that lovely green stomach acid to annoy you before trying again. If you have Mega Flare fully leveled and have the right abilities equipped, the first phase is over in an instant, meaning you can focus on fighting the whale itself. Eventually you can form a pattern to easily stun the whale early on, then using various powerful commands, shot locks, and styles to utterly waste the whale extremely quickly. In fact, if you nail your pattern, this fight can only take 2 minutes, which is what also nets you 675 medals for use in the Mirage arena, an excellent way to grind the 5 Mirage ranks needed to unlock the other 2 super bosses in the arena very quickly, one of which was the Armor of Ericus. I'll deal with the other when it's Aqua's turn. The other super boss, which was found in all versions of the game, is found in what is now known as the Keyblade Graveyard, but is only accessible once you've beaten most of the main game. You will land in the Badlands area of the world and approach a crest that very much resembles an absent silhouette from Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, which isn't unwarranted. Examining it will trigger a souped-up boss fight with the Vanitas Remnant, an unversed manifestation of Vanitas' will and feelings, hence the special unversed. This is more of a sneak peek at Vanitas' full potential, as no story boss is ever as strong as its super boss equivalent for obvious reasons. While the Remnant only has 1 bar of HP, its attacks are bumped up to 11 and is pretty relentless, able to summon clones of itself, activate a shot lock of its own, can trigger Dark Fang, an attack where multiple dark crystals blinds an opponent, making the fight even harder to hit, as the Remnant is wicked fast as well. To top it all off, it can cast Curaga on itself if the player uses any cure spell. This is where items are a necessity, as they're the only reliable way to heal yourself unless you're able to defeat this Remnant without getting touched, in which case you are way better than I am. This fight does a lot of patience, since the Remnant is fast, relentless, and can instantly break out of any combo you throw at it and warp behind you, much like the real Vanitas, meaning you will need to be at your best throughout the entirety of the fight. Terra has it the worst here, since a slide only grants temporary iframes while dodge roll and cartwheel are continuous if you keep mashing square. So if you're patient and don't mind hit and run tactics, you can slowly whittle down the Remnant with chip damage. This most recent fight of mine took me about 11 minutes in total, and that was only after an early failed attempt, and in the original game, how many fights it took me to realize how to beat this thing. Despite how intimidating the fight sounds, there are quite a few safe methods to damage it. The easiest recommendation are mind commands, as the Remnant has a habit of making a beeline for the player if you keep your distance, so you can trick it into running into the mines of its own volition, and you can use its attacks to dodge around and trip itself up even further. My go-to Fire and Thunder Surges are recommended here, since you can dodge through all of its attacks while potentially damaging it, maybe hurting one of its retaliatory clones or attacks. There's also a bug that you can abuse by hiding behind one of the rocks and triggering one of the many raid attacks over and over, but not even I'm that cheeky. My cousin initially showed me this one and I had no idea how that slipped by, but it is a strategy I suppose. He then felt bad about it when he discovered it was a bug and decided to beat him honorably, even though I wasn't even aware that that was a thing until he brought it up, and then I looked online and saw that it was indeed a method a lot used. Kinda funny how that works. Once the Remnant is eventually defeated, you're given a copy of Vanitas' Keyblade, Void Gear. It's a pretty sinister looking Keyblade, likely behind Master Xehanort's in terms of intimidation and darkness factor. What with that recurring blue eyeball adorned twice on this thing. Defeating the Vanitas Remnant will also unlock the toughest super bosses in the game, and I do consider it the toughest fight in the series for a few reasons, so that's not nothing. Again, I'll address it during Aqua's storyline to cap it off since that is the sequel to super boss, so for now we'll warp to the other part of the Keyblade Graveyard that matters, starting back off in that infamous cutscene the game is teased with. Back at the crossroads, we now know the context behind Ven's dour request, understanding that this Keyblade Master Xehanort requires is to reignite the Keyblade War. To do this, a being of pure light and pure darkness must clash, something Ven had no intention of doing, but now may have little to no choice as they're all brought together to the Keyblade Graveyard on the threat of death, or worse. Once the cutscene occurs again, we instead transition to a frozen Ven after Aqua saved him from fatally shattering, no doubt. As Terra deals with matters above, we are reintroduced to Braig, taunting the two Keyblade wielders about Terra's assistance in striking down Master Ericus. Suggesting Aqua leave Ven with him so Aqua can exact revenge on Terra's act, the Keyblade Master asks who Braig is. We then zoom in on Braig's face, his remaining eye now an eerie yellow among some other more subtle changes. Claiming that they don't have any larger importance than to be killed by him to fuel Terra's rage and succumbing to his darkness, Braig is yelled at by Ven. Commenting on the angry look of the youth, Aqua then challenges Braig to battle, Ven remaining frozen on the ground, helpless. After their quick battle, Braig runs off, claiming he simply bought Master Xehanort some time. Ven warns Aqua too late of an incoming Vanitas, who strikes down Aqua from above, horrifying Ven as Vanitas attempts to finish her off. Ven is so pissed off, his rage melts the frost off of his body, giving him free movement once more as Ven challenges Vanitas. Vanitas will behave roughly the same as he did earlier in the Badlands, but will now ride the Keyblade Storm while throwing out magical attacks like in the cutscene, but is otherwise nowhere near as rough as his Remnant is, which isn't something a first-time player will have even experienced before this one. As long as you have found some good commands to match Ven's fighting style, this fight is more of a teaser for the real final boss. With Vanitas bested by Ventus, the masked boy begins to leak darkness, smiling as if he was waiting for this moment since the adventure began. If his voice sounded familiar, you'll soon be rewarded. His mask peeling away, Vanitas is revealed to have the face and voice of none other than a black-haired 15-year-old Sora. Claiming they'll now have to merge together since his body is about to be destroyed, Vanitas says the time has come to forge the Keyblade as the darkness emanating from him surrounds Ventus. Ven is then immobilized from the unversed that appear from his darkness, shocked that the monsters came from his darker half. Reconfirming what Terra and Aqua were told, Vanitas confirms that he is the source of the seemingly endless stream of unversed. When he was split from Ventus, Vanitas' negativity from the act gave shape to his emotions. Vanitas then proceeded to unleash the Unversed into various worlds that he had visited, hoping to spur on Ventus to leave the land of departure and to toughen him up to match Vanitas' strength. Better still for them, every time an Unversed was destroyed, their negativity flowed right back into Vanitas, an endless cycle to ensure his and Master Xehanort's plan would succeed. Gloating over his apparent victory, Vanitas approaches Ventus, the two enveloped into a ball of light. The blast of power throwing Aqua aside as the energy Master Xehanort and Terra saw from their perspective emerges. We then transition to Ventus' dive to the heart, the stained glass station now depicting Vanitas alongside him as a result of their fusion. Vanitas emerges, remarking the Keyblade Forge is broken due to their incomplete union. When Ventus says he'd rather destroy it and Vanitas, the Dark Youth callously laughs, claiming that the Keyblade is forged from both of their hearts, and defeating it would spell certain doom for them both. Ven is unfazed, claiming he's willing to sacrifice his own heart if it means saving Terra and Aqua. He then comes out with a pretty familiar speech to fans of the first Kingdom Hearts before they begin their final battle.
I've become a part of their heart, just as they become a part of mine. My friends are my power, and I'm theirs.
Vanitas will fight as he always has with the Keyblade equipped this time, leading one to wonder where the fight stakes are to be raised at. Take out all of his HP this time around though, and Vanitas will shatter their station, stained glass fragments floating into the abyss as Vanitas delinks with Ventus. This naturally changes Ven's commands into a deck consisting of Dark Spiral and Dark Splicer. The goal here is to counter Vanitas' attacks in order to charge up Vanitas' command gauge to finish him off. It may take a bit to trigger the proper parries, but when you do, it will trigger a clash, presenting one of 3 QTE attempts. Dark Splicer prompts slow motion counters to the warping strikes, with Dark Spiral requiring a rotation of the control stick. Ventus cannot heal in this final phase, so keep up on the attacks and be wary. One simple way to trigger Vanitas' counter 90% of the time is to trigger your Shot Lock, which has now been replaced with Dark Link, the same move the Vanitas Remnant can use. Using this yourself would often cause Vanitas to use his as well, and the prompt is a satisfying mashing of X, overpowering him and charging the gauge further. Once full, it will trigger the finisher Last Word, a satisfying end that has Ventus trapping Vanitas within crystals made of light before slashing it and Vanitas both, defeating the Negasaura. True to his word, the Keyblade is then shattered, Vanitas kind of pathetically reaching out for the weapon before it flies out of reach, resigned to his fate. Severing their connection, Ventus watches as the Keyblade's remains fall alongside Vanitas in a shower of light over a darkened station. Hitting it as a massive light reforms the platform, Ven's Keyblade also disappears before he does as well. Ventus looks up upon his dive to the heart before he dissipates into light similar to Master Ericus did before on Terra's path, his body vanishing as his heart flies into the void above the station. In the lanes between, Mickey finds the Keyblade armors of both Ventus and Aqua, using his Star Shard to take them away as we return back to Ventus diving into a familiar place. Recognizing this warm heart, the game abruptly ends. No joke, it's just done. They give you the hint, you're left with that, and this ends Ventus' storyline. We have now gotten more reveals and hints at Master Xehanort's ultimate goal. Alongside with the obvious Vanitas reveal, we see the fabled Keyblade War is very much on Xehanort's mind, all the previous hints coming to fruition as we only have one more perspective to get through. There's quite a bit of lore details to help explain a lot of what just went down, but as usual I'll save that and more for the requisite lore and scenario mysteries section near the end of these videos. The credits would have spoiled Vanitas' face and voice if you paid attention to who voiced him and knew who Haley Joel Osment is, but I'll spill my thoughts on this later. For now, let's dive into the final character who was the greatest mystery heading into Birth by Sleep.
This place... I've been here. So warm. I remember now. This is your heart.
This is where I first replayed the opening tutorials to gain further understanding on what I just saw hours before, and also to confirm a theory I had which was correct even more in hindsight. This means a lot more once you know both Terra and Ventus' storylines, but for now let's continue back from the result of the Mark of Mastery, since I'll be covering a lot of this stuff again when we reach the lore section. Aqua is the only one determined worthy of the title of Master after she plays mom to Ventus again. With Terra doing some self-reflection and Ven returning to his room in the meantime, Aqua is being briefed by Master Ericus on her new duties and knowledge as Master when the bells toll, signaling Jensen's communication with his friend Ericus. Terra rushes in wondering what's happened as Aqua questions where Ven is. After being filled in on the unversed threat and their task to protect the Princess of Heart while searching for a now missing Master Xehanort, Terra sets off with the goal of proving his master he has what it takes. Just as a worried Aqua intends on joining him after Ven chases Terra outside, Ericus pulls her aside for a moment in regards to Terra. Despite his hopes that Terra can show the mark, Ericus is worried about his inner darkness, claiming it runs very deep and requests Aqua to bring Terra back if it proves too much for him. Aqua promises to bring her friend back, claiming that Terra isn't as weak as Ericus believes. Very tragic knowing the bad ends for her two friends coming up. Outside, Aqua and Ericus try to stop Ventus after he reactivates his own Keyblade armor and glider after Terra. Ericus frantic that Ven mustn't leave. Aqua does the same as Ericus' request to watch over Terra and bring Ventus back to the land of departure is heard, her journey as a master looking after her two friends just beginning. Fingers are crossed that her perspective will finally enlighten a bunch of behind-the-scenes goings-on around the two boys, so let's get down to business. At this point, it's clear that a time dilation is in effect. While Castle of Dreams is Terra's second Disney World after Ventus' own visit chronologically, this is Aqua's first Disney Princess World. While it's nice to have all three characters begin in a different world, it makes obsessives like me wonder what she did in the lanes between, or if there were other things that she did. This is absolutely a me type of comment, so just ignore it. We begin at the end of Terra's stint in the world. As Aqua arrives seeing Cinderella run off at the stroke of midnight, with the Grand Duke chasing after her, she runs across Terra, who has had no luck in finding Master Xehanort thus far beyond his quest for pure Hearts of Light. He does, however, give her advice and claims that Cinderella, an aforementioned Princess of Heart, lifted his spirits enough with the power of belief. Aqua relieved that Terra seems to be fighting the darkness as she'd hoped, convinced he won't succumb to it. As Aqua enters the ballroom, she passes Lady Tremaine and her 2 daughters, an unversed face flashing in her mind, pegging the negative feelings as legitimately dangerous sorts of darkness. She asks the Grand Duke of their identities. After the prince hilariously mistakes Aqua for Cinderella, props for taste but you're blind, dude, Aqua learns that the Duke searched to find for the maiden who has lost the glass slipper from the king, Aqua tagging along to feel out the disturbance in the force, as it were. This is where a new player will adjust for a 3rd time, potentially, to a different character's fighting style. On Proud and Critical especially, Aqua hits like a wet blanket without Ven's speed to fully compensate for it. However, her specialty lies in magic, so once you start gaining them and begin synthesizing the more powerful Aqua-exclusive commands, she'll be a force to be reckoned with as a magician beyond any other playable character. She's not completely helpless though. Aqua's cartwheel has the same properties of Ven's dodge roll once fully leveled, in that button mashing the move will leave you virtually invincible, which is what makes her my favorite character to control in Birth by Sleep. Wide-ranging and powerful magic attacks on infinite cooldowns, and a cartwheel to dodge most attacks alongside my personal favorite touches like Barrier, and generally being my favorite female character in this franchise. Plus blue hair. My mascot may have given away my bias there, but I like to be honest with you guys. Another fun aspect of the combat system in Birth by Sleep. The battle system works on a 3 to 6 hit system. Combo Master was an ability introduced in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix that allowed Sora to continue through a combo no matter if he hit anything or not. Usually, if you fail to connect a hit, your combo ends and you will restart from the first hit. Combo Master allowed players to preemptively build up certain later sections of a combo if you knew your enemy or wanted to semi-parry while approaching a foe. Days also featured this as an innate ability for all characters, but it's reversed back for Birth by Sleep. I mention this because of how you can bait certain enemies in various hit-and-run tactics. For a character like Vanitas, who can warp behind the player after a random hit, the player can dodge roll or cartwheel after attacking and try to strike the opponent after their successful hit, or keep dodging if the opponent is retaliating somehow. If you do this, you can resume a combo as long as you strike something afterwards. So Aqua can strike a bruiser, cartwheel out of its retaliatory punch, and then continue the second hit of an attack before finishing up or cartwheeling out of the way again. This is something I ran into back on my first run in 2010 thanks to the crushing difficulty enemies can have on Critical, and it's very essential for the hardest boss fights in terms of remaining invulnerable until you find an appropriate opening. Just a small bit of helpful advice for any first-time Aqua players on Proud and Critical before the magic starts appearing in full force. While Aqua doesn't have the strength or speed of her friends, she does have access to their D-Links, alongside her Spellweaver command style to help with early crowd control and chip damage. Once Aqua arrives at the chateau, the fairy godmother stops Aqua from barging in, saying it's dangerous to confront the darkness with light. Confused about this, Aqua learns that fighting with stronger light will always produce strong shadows, and instead suggests that she helps Cinderella reignite her own light. The fairy godmother then shrinks Aqua down temporarily to help Jacques deliver the key to Cinderella, who's being locked in her own room. Aqua's escort mission involves protecting Jacques from various unversed, once she learns that the mouse knows of Ven, who left looking for Terra. The same rules apply for this mission, even though I failed on my most recent attempt here since I didn't do a good job at balancing all the enemies. Them's the breaks, but this can sometimes be the quickest escort mission in the game, since Jacques doesn't actually have far to run before you can seize victory. While checking up on the last few minutes of the film, where the Duke is about to leave without having seen Cinderella, Aqua suddenly enlarges to her normal size. Rightfully asking what a stranger is doing in her house, Lady Tremaine then attempts to wrap up the Duke's presence here, Aqua asking to try on the slipper to buy more time. Thankfully, the Duke realizes full well that she isn't the maiden that they're looking for, but is still willing to humor her before Cinderella arrives and proves that she is the señorita as she has the other slipper. Before everything can end on a happy note, Aqua thanking Cinderella for helping to boost Terra's power and belief, Lady Tremaine and her daughters' negative emotions help conjure up a giant unverse to attack Cinderella, leading to Aqua's first unverse boss fight. Amusing to me is how they blow up as a result of this. They kind of burn up with absolutely no redemption here, unlike how, say, Anastasia's arc is in the sequels tends to be, so that's just kind of something. Aqua's fight with the Cursed Coach is the usual test of a player's understanding of their new character. Long-range attacks are definitely recommended here, as the game even reinforces the need to block the unversed physical attacks with Barrier, something I didn't heed on my first playthrough. I instead D-linked during this fight, abusing Ven's haste and air drive finisher instead. The coach will attempt to suck in and chew on Aqua for a bit, but if she is your third character, you've likely caught on to the various early strategies for the first unverse bosses by now. If not, well, I've also just suggested that for all three parts as well. All's well that ends well, starting Aqua's usual MO of showing up to wrap up the Disney World's events. The new master takes to heart the lesson that darkness doesn't always have to be defeated with light, something Eric has drilled into them for years. I appreciate the larger implications Birth by Sleep now has on how light and darkness are simply tools that tend to attract a specific type of audience. As Riku has proven in his character arc as the Atoner, one can be good and utilize darkness, while someone as self-righteous as Master Ericus can also be blinded by light and lose sight of the nuances at the cost of betraying their principles. Nice way to get across that there's a middle ground between both extremes. Aqua then lands in the Dwarf Woodlands after Terra and Ven, finding Snow White cursed by the poisoned apple in her glass coffin being mourned by the 7 dwarves, who fill her in on the story. Aqua then takes it upon herself to go back to the Queen/Hag's castle and hopefully set things right. There's not much to say new on this one. Aqua's shtick is usually retreading a mixture of both Terra and Ven's visits through the worlds, learning about previous events and helping conclude the plots begun by the boys. This is no exception. You'll travel through the woods and to the Magic Mirror Chamber, running into Prince Charming along the way and directing him towards Snow White at the dwarf's cottage. Once there, the spirit of the Magic Mirror sucks her into another battle, still reeling from the potion that turned him into a makeshift unversed apparently. This battle is pretty similar to Terra's encounter, so once that's done with, Aqua returns to find the prince waking Snow White with true love's kiss, restoring the Princess of Heart and granting her a happy ending for a time. The miracle reminds Aqua of when Ventus first joined them years ago, and when he fell into a deep sleep. He would eventually wake, Aqua overjoyed and claiming every waking is a new journey, wondering if it was simply Ven's time to leave to finally strike out on his own. 2 worlds down, 1 more to go before the halfway point. Aqua arrives at Enchanted Dominion, catching up to Ventus, denying the dark deeds Maleficent accuses Terra of. After Ven runs off to find Terra after Aqua suggests the young Keyblade wielder return to the land for departure, Aqua turns her attention to Maleficent, her obsession with the Keyblade as she means of unlocking the hearts of men in world's evidence. Casting Aqua in doubt as she wonders if Terra actually was capable of such deeds, Maleficent drops her into the dungeons after mentioning she was told of the Keyblade by Master Xehanort. In the cells, Aqua meets up with the 3 good fairies and Prince Philip, teaming up with them to escape the castle and confront Maleficent once again. What follows is probably Birth by Sleep's most extensive set-piece moment. Aqua is sent alongside Philip to do battle with Maleficent's goons as they escape the castle, including teaming up with him to break down segments of the castle to unlock 2 gates while avoiding and/or defeating the goons. It's a pretty satisfying change of pace, as most of Days and Birth by Sleep is characterized by solitary journeys without a major party, so relish the actual company while you can. Once they reach the bridge, Maleficent casts her Forest of Thorns across the kingdom and then does battle with them in her dragon form via her powers of hell. She's back to being pretty powerful, especially if you get caught up in her iconic green flames or run into her ground pounds on critical or proud, and all but guaranteeing a game over if you aren't prepared for it. Prince Philip is instrumental in dealing major damage for this fight, since he can block her flames while also launching Aqua atop the dragon by triggering the Selfless Prince reaction command. This either stops her flames if on the ground, or helps reach Maleficent when she's flying around the field. Eventually Aqua will defeat Maleficent, transforming back from her dragon form as Prince Philip deals the final blow with the assistance of the 3 fairies. Though I have to point out that the spell isn't as effective as it was in the film here, since Maleficent doesn't die. It's up to a 14-year-old in a decade's time. Severely wounded regardless, Aqua says that true love is what defeated Maleficent, confident that she'll never be able to defeat a heart filled with light. Maleficent correctly counters that while light exists, so too will darkness, and that eventually more will be drawn to its lure in time. Her worry about Terra increased, Aqua then returns to the lanes and spots Terra heading towards Radiant Garden, the Keyblade Master following suit. Returning once again to the big gathering in the middle of the intertwined story, Aqua politely asks Scrooge McDuck if he's seen a boy that wasn't from around Radiant Garden, pointing her towards the looming castle in the middle of the town. Assuming it's Terra, she goes to the flower gardens and runs into a young girl being attacked by Unversed in front of the castle's doors. Hiding behind Aqua's Keyblade, Mickey shows up to assist the Keyblade Master and help vanquish the emotional monsters. Afterwards, Aqua and Mickey properly introduce themselves, Aqua training under Master Ericus and Mickey under Master Yen Sid. Mickey agrees that the young redhead's heart is also filled with light, claiming she must be someone very special and worth protecting, filling the young Kairi with awe at the immense compliment, which is kinda cute. Before anything can be done, Mickey's Star Shard activates, sending him flying out of the scene. Kairi then gifts Aqua with some flowers and thanks for rescuing her, introducing herself as Kairi. Before Kairi returns to her grandmother calling out for her, Aqua casts a spell on her to help protect her light. The next time she's in trouble, her light will lead her to another's, hopefully to keep her safe. As Kairi leaves with her grandmother, she asks for another retelling of her favorite fairy tale. What follows is a voiced retelling of the story seen in the first Kingdom Hearts, the tale of people fighting over the light eventually being swallowed up by darkness, which now has a bit more meaning this time around, especially tying into the fabled Keyblade War. Aqua concludes her meeting with Kairi was no accident, who was then given Kairi's Keyblade that she received from Riku in Kingdom Hearts 2 alongside its name, Destiny's Embrace. This is a pretty great Keyblade, boasting both attack and magic boosts, so I keep it around for a while. Aqua then spots her Unverse that forms Trinity armor, saving some time by following its shortcut to the reactor the Unverse blew into an otherwise closed door in the gardens. The battle occurs for a third time, the mood lifting then souring all the same. Terra heard about Aqua spying on her, revealing Ericus's distrust of his student, while Ventus remains disappointed at Aqua's apparent inflated ego after becoming a master. Having followed her, I think most would agree that she doesn't deserve all the blame, as she's done nothing wrong besides acting concerned, and rightfully so if you know the other two campaigns. Left alone to contemplate her situation beneath Radiant Garden's purple skies, likely not feeling any different despite becoming a master, Aqua then follows them through the aqueduct and back towards Merlin's house. She then has the same offer from the wizard to awaken the powers within, via the book housing the 100-acre wood, as he predicted earlier on, and I will finally address what this does in a few minutes. Again, the grinding can commence with all abilities unlocked if you so desire, so I'll go off assuming that you've done that once again. She then enters the central square spotting Vanitas for the first time after her earlier conversation with Ventus. He then challenges Aqua, assured in his own strength. Vanitas behaves as he always has, so I can't add much to this potential rematch that I haven't said before. The battle concludes, Vanitas laughing maniacally as Aqua attempts to unmask the boy. Congratulating her on the win, Vanitas remarks that he'll use her as a backup before vanishing into a corridor of darkness. Aqua, now determined to stop Vanitas before he hurts either Terra or Ven, she sees Ven approaching her. News that Terra has left causing her to leave immediately while ordering Ventus to return home. Dismayed at another rejection, Aqua assures him that she's trying to protect him and then activates her left pauldron. Riding her glider out of the world, we now approach the third and final second half of the story once more. We're getting there. Canonically, Aqua's the third and final visit to Disney Town, despite leaving before Ventus does. Time dilation stuff, I'm sure. She runs into Captain Justice, unimpressed at his heroic grandstanding, before Horace Horsecollar requests help in what is by far the worst minigame in Birth by Sleep. You explore the town again if you want, but it's not necessary, while Fruitball is unfortunately required to move on, so Aqua is charged with getting rid of the Unversed in the plaza by defeating them in this stupid minigame. Useless trivia, the banner to the plaza is instead named Fruit Scatter. While I'm in a negative mood, can I say the instrumentation for Disney Town here drives me absolutely nuts? The loop is so dang short here that this overly happy and slightly obnoxious rendition of the Mickey Mouse March really starts rubbing me the wrong way after a while. This did start to seep in earlier when I was exploring with Ventus to discover Superglide, but it's more worth pointing out here because I absolutely despise Fruitball, and it's a part I dread every time I come back to this game, even though it's such a small percentage of the overall experience. The goal here is to simply smack various fruits into your opponent's goal, ranging from apples, grapes, bananas, watermelons, and pineapples. Apples have no special effects, but the other fruits do. The melons and pineapples can stun you if you're hit by them, while bananas can turn into peels that stun you if they break upon the ground hard enough, and grapes can shatter into individual fruit that can each count as a point. This is for either side too, so you could either come out ahead very easily or can suddenly lose a match if you're unlucky. And I do say luck. While you do have some control over the hits, from standard shoot, curve, and bump shots, which can then be used to fire off fruit to either slam into opponents or aim for the goal in a straight or curved shot, I never find I'm in as much control in this minigame as I'd like to be. You're outnumbered in this requisite round 0 match, but the AI isn't as terrible as it can be if you go for this minigame outside of Aqua's required game. Nets appear at specific intervals of time and can easily screw you over if you are again unlucky enough to have a grape slam behind you, but whose net sudden appearance can suddenly throw 3 to 4 back at your own goal, and you're suddenly down in the last 30 seconds, then have to freaking start over this game, and it's horrible. I hate it. It probably only bothers me this much because I enjoyed the other 2 minigames well enough, and the rest of the game's pretty fine, but that's my own take on this terrible minigame. Everything else in Birth by Sleep either is perfectly functional, or absolutely inoffensive, so Fruitball stands out to me as likely the game's only major negative, which is overall a good thing. After the eventual victory, mine of which luckily only took 1 take this time around, Aqua is introduced to Queen Minnie and the whole Million Dreams of One thing going on, earning Horace's vote in the process. Minnie has a small arc of questioning her leadership skills since King Mickey left for more Keyblade training, learning about Pete masquerading as both Captain Justice and Captain Dark for bragging rights. This deals with the what makes a true hero theme that Olympus likes to run with, which we'll get to right after this. Since Aqua is the final visitor to the world, she's around for the tallied votes resulting in a 3-way tie between Terra, Ven, and herself, brightening up Aqua's mood, but sad that they are no longer around. Pete is also upset that he wasn't the winner despite actually earning a few honest votes, upsetting Queen Minnie at his blatant disregard for learning the Disney lesson. Finally pushing beyond her patience threshold, Minnie summons the guards, who are the sentient brooms from Fantasia, and locks Pete in another dimension to cool off for a while. For her win, Aqua accepts the award on behalf of her friends and is also given Royal Berry Ice Cream, which grants her immediate access to the Blade Charge command style. You can also be given the award to Terra and Ven after Aqua's received it, each getting in different ice cream flavors, though Aqua's is seen as the canon recipient. Briefly cutting to Pete in his pocket dimension of sorts as he plans to escape, he is hailed by Maleficent. The Dark Fairy chastises his lack of power for such a feat, though she extends an offer to break him out of his prison in exchange for assisting her. Pete agrees to do anything she wants in exchange for being set free, Maleficent beginning to discover ways to contact various worlds via Corridors of Darkness. With that setup out of the way, we're off to the remaining combat-oriented Disney worlds. In our final visit to Olympus Coliseum, Aqua arrives to face multiple and burst, Phil promptly arriving to attempt to defend her, if ever briefly before Herc jumps in to actually assist Aqua. The satyr then proceeds to hit on her after they take care of the monsters, delighting me that they took the opportunity to keep Phil in character while they had the chance. Them different attributes. Aqua is then filled in on some past events. Turns out that all of Greece has been hailing Terra after he plows through the first games he's ever entered, Hercules then looking up to him as a true hero for his pure strength. Phil and Herc convince her to stick around by signing up for the games in an attempt for Terra to keep his title, something Aqua does reluctantly. She makes it all the way through her matches before meeting Zack, her next opponent who's also fighting to face Terra fair and square after the previous match. When Phil describes how the East and West brackets work, Aqua is about to leave for the other bracket when Phil makes up a rule on the spot for her to stick around, to which she agrees to finish what she began. Before the match, Aqua asks how Zack knows Terra, who then regales her of their match and how Terra helped him break free of Hades' control, helping put Aqua's mind at ease that Terra didn't use the darkness to do it. The fight with Zack is pretty standard fare, Aqua handily winning and then comes face to face with Hades, who is her final opponent. The Lord of the Dead says Terra was spineless for refusing the darkness, something Aqua defends on Terra's behalf thanks to Zack's words. Hades disagrees, saying Terra asked him personally on how to handle darkness, something Aqua then refuses when she is offered it. Zack then watches from the stands as Aqua faces off against Hades and an Ice Colossus, since the rules never stated it to be one-on-one. Jumping in to help, Aqua declines Zack's offer, able to handily defeat both the Colossus and Hades on her own. While the Ice Colossus is basically a nerfed Ice Titan from the first Kingdom Hearts, it's so easy to trigger the Firestorm command style here that this fight isn't too difficult at all, even if you aren't over-leveled. Hades is up next, but he's nowhere near as annoying as he was in his previous fights in earlier games, so go wild with any option you wish. With the Colossus soundly defeated, Hades concludes that he needs to use a real Titan next time and vanishes. Celebrating, Zack asks Aqua out on a date, the Keyblade Master actually becoming flustered at the proposal. He then changes the date as a reward once he becomes a true hero, and runs off the train. You chase the dream, Zack. Herc then shows up, said how his training schedule made him miss her final matches. After a bit of strength alone does not a hero make boosting for Herc, Aqua then tells him to keep at it, something she hopes Terra keeps doing against his darkness. Now to finally address that command board. Earlier on in the tutorial, Aqua explains that Ericus taught them that power is born within the heart, and the gimmick with the 100-acre wood this time around is helping awaken the powers inside you and all that jazz. This is what leads to the command board to be accessed at virtually any time. This is a virtual board game, and it's a pretty decent one at that. It uses various commands the player possesses to use as both playing pieces a la Monopoly, and as methods to alter the dice thrown to move around one of the 7 boards, which unlock as you play through the game. The goal of the command board is to collect a certain amount of GP and pass go, aka the starting panel. To do this, you are generally set to travel to 4 colored blocks on the board, after which you gain bonus points when returning to the start to do it all over again. You begin with 5 commands categorized into attack, magic, and miscellaneous cards, with a special joker acting as a random. Normally when you land on empty spots, you can buy them and place down a command, which then demands payment from opponents, again Monopoly style. You can then level these up when standing on them yourself or when on the colored tiles. You're allowed a starting amount of GP to use as money. You can also gain back a command every time you pass the 4 colored spaces, so it's incentivized to either place down commands to begin racking up GP and improve upon them, or use them to give yourself 2 to 3 dice rolls instead of 1, or to simply protect yourself from paying out on one spot, or even to change directions on the board. Your hand is also restored once you pass go with all 4 colors. Each board was modeled after a different world, and each triggers a different special panel. In this footage's case, it triggers a Keyblade glider that will allow you to travel to any spot on the board. This is how you unlock a hidden D-Link in Pete, naturally in his Captain Justice or Captain Dark personas. He's either a benefit or a curse depending on which mask he's wearing at the time, and he's also random. I'm simply lucky I got all the footage I needed on one game to demonstrate this. He can't be passed on to any player if you pass the active one too, so he's got some tactical use. And the minigame isn't just for show either. All the commands you place down or even buy on special predestined spots during a game will then level up afterwards regardless of where you placed. This is how you can get some commands more easily, so it's not simply a waste of time, since you will need to win at least 7 games to unlock all the Mirage Arena fights. You thankfully don't have to win on all 7 boards. The later boards are filled with various opponents who will become ruthless as you progress, the digital cheats. So while I said the command board was completely optional, it is so much as not requiring you to even touch the menu to beat the main game. However, the toughest fights in the Mirage Arena will require you to play a minimum of 7 games, so just keep that in mind. Luckily I love board games, and this one is perfectly fine. Even if they did miss an opportunity to incorporate online capability for this one, I get why it doesn't exist here. On the PSP, local matches were a pretty fun feature for my cousin and I, but he also likes Kingdom Hearts and board games, so ignore my biases here. Days gone by and all that. All in all, I like the command board, but understand if someone doesn't want to even look at it. There are worse minigames in the series for me, and at least this one has a tangible reward in terms of commands and leveling them up, so hooray for always unlocking and filling some meter in this game. Feels that psychological tick for constant progress. Now that I've covered virtually every minigame Birth by Sleep has for completion's sake, barring one, let's get back to the meat of the game, shall we? It's time for Aqua to fill in the missing gap between Terra's initial visit and Ven closing out events in deep space. Aqua arrives on the Federation ship on alert thanks to an infestation of Unversed. After clearing them out, Aqua finds the makeshift wayfinder made by Experiment 626, the hostile alien calming down once she sees her Keyblade, recognizing her as a friend of Terra. Aqua explains to Captain Gantu and the Grand Councilwoman that she is here to defeat the Unversed, something that only her Keyblade is effective against. Aqua is then sent off to recapture Experiment 626 and its creator Dr. Jumbo Jukiba, supplanting Captain Gantu in its task. Hoping to run into Terra and Ven thanks to 626's Wayfinder, she proceeds to rid the ship of Unversed, eventually running into said Wayfinder outside of the ship. Returning inside the Terra prison block, Aqua can team up with 626 in defeating the various Unversed, the experiment constantly repeating Terra's name. When she returns to the Grand Councilwoman to ask about how dangerous 626 really is, Aqua then finds Dr. Jumbo in 626, the small alien immediately reclaiming his charm from Aqua, something it copied from Terra's. Proving to her that 626 isn't merely a mindless and dangerous creature, and that Terra is still alright to be valuing his own Wayfinder this much, Aqua then faces off against Captain Gantu, who attempts to destroy both fugitives instead of turning them in alive. This fight is pretty simple. Aqua is able to team up with 626, even though I again missed the opportunity on this file since I was too OP, I finished the fight within 30 seconds instead. Whoops. The captain is demoted as the Grand Councilwoman recaptures the evil genius and supposed abomination. Aqua pleads the Grand Councilwoman to give 626 a chance, possibly lowering his sentence on good behavior, a consideration that is granted. Aqua then befriends 626, the little alien repeating Terra, Ven, and her names. Their ohana growing as he joins as a D-Link, wrapping up the world as we enter the final Disney location for the third and last time. Back on Neverland, Cubby and Slightly are disappointed when Aqua picks up a treasure map first, Peter Pan flying in to proclaim that Aqua is now the leader, something she concedes to play along with the Lost Boys. Miss Pantyshot upset at another girl joining them, Aqua then leads the gang on their expedition, eventually circling around the island. Aqua then gains the double flight ability here, which is essentially a magical double jump. Along the way, Hook's ship will produce cannon fire and some specifically placed pixie dust will act as automatic springboards, so there is some decent vertical exploration this time around with the usual Disney adventuring and moral lessons on being a good leader and overcoming your fears. Once they realize they've essentially just circled the island, Aqua and the gang confront Hook once more, finding his own treasure chest and sees it's been replaced with junk. Running off once again thanks to the crocodile, Hook exits stage right as Aqua finds Terra's wooden Keyblade that Ventus must have left behind as a keepsake. Aqua comments on how she's behind her friends once again, but not before sensing someone else is nearby as well. Heading off towards the Indian camp, Aqua finds Vanitas once more with the wooden Keyblade. Somehow, Aqua asks the same continuity question here, breaking it in half before attacking Aqua once again. Vanitas is a little bit more aggressive, but isn't anything Aqua can handle if she's got a fully leveled cartwheel and some decent commands and shot blocks at this stage in the game. Hopefully your own strategies will have been forming with Aqua here, as the defeat leads Aqua to pass out in exhaustion, hoping she's put down the masked boy for good. She recalls her two friends before this all started while she's knocked out, being found by the Lost Boys later on, with Vanitas nowhere in sight. Aqua is unfazed by the broken Keyblade, claiming that their real treasure is their invisible bond between the three of them, leaving on an upbeat note before the finale comes crashing down with the fated confrontation ahead. While traveling the lanes, Aqua is drawn to a light coming from Destiny Islands. She sees the star-shaped Palpu fruit in person before praying to her wayfinder that she is ready for whatever storm is approaching them, fearing that she may have to face Terra eventually. Aqua then sees young Riku and Sora racing each other on the beach, the Keyblade Master introducing herself to both boys as they return the favor, seeing Terra and Ventus in both of them. As she contemplates giving one of them the power to wield the Keyblade, Aqua then senses someone has already bequeathed it to Riku, wondering if it was Terra. She then reconsiders, hoping that Sora would keep Riku safe were anything to happen to him, projecting her wishes onto the two best friends given her current situation. The two boys returning to the rowboats, Aqua then looks upon the sunset, unwilling to thrust more than one Keyblade onto a friendship. Reflecting on how her trio is slowly being stressed to the breaking point, she leaves the islands and spots Mickey floating with a star shard in the lanes, taking it back to Master Yensid's mysterious tower. Returning Mickey to a worried Donald and Goofy, Yensid informs Aqua that Master Ericus' star has flickered out. Even worse, she is shocked to hear Master Xehanort and Terra were responsible, something Aqua vehemently denies after all of the stories she has been told during her journey. Asking where he's gone, Yensid informs her that Terra's heart is leading him to the Keyblade Graveyard. The ex-master cautions her to be on her guard, Aqua determined to get them out of this trouble before anything terrible happens. But before this, it's time for more Super Boss encounters. One's another data approximation, but the other is the third sequel tease boss, so let's handle both right here before the final endgame. Peering into Darkness is unlocked in the Mirage Arena once you reach the max rank of 30, which means you will have had to have beaten every other arena mode match, won 7 command board games in the Mirage Arena, and have bested the 4 specific times for each of the Rumble Racing courses. Once all that's done, you'll be given a chance to face a familiar looking silhouette to anyone who's played Kingdom Hearts 2 to completion. The most intense fight in the arena occurs in 2 stages, the first of which is a final round against a sinister looking Keyblade with a slit blue eye. It creates an impenetrable barrier in the throne room of the Land of Departure, requiring the player to defeat the Keyblade before the real fight can commence. Terra has it the worst here, since his slide doesn't retain iframes for the duration of his dodges, while Ven and Aqua's evasive maneuvers allow for constant vulnerability in hectic fights such as this. The first phase against the Keyblade only has around 4 HP meters, but your real opponent behind the wall will constantly fire off Darkness Blast and can summon a stream of Keyblades. To make the fight more interesting, it can also conjure up a corridor of darkness in an attempt to suck in the player, and if caught, leaves them completely vulnerable to attacks. This phase is more of a formality though, as defeating the Keyblade will lower the barrier for the real fight. Getting a clear view at the enemy, we now see the armored guardian form Xemnas took when facing off against him and his mechanical dragon Nobody, but this time it stands up and removes its long cloaks. Turns out we're facing an entity known as No Heart, and if you rearrange the letters and throw in an X, turns out you get a second name besides another that also forms the name of Xehanort. And if the simulation is to be believed, we've known Xehanort's Keyblade armor for 3 games now, as this all but confirms it. Alongside wielding his Keyblade and the anagram, I don't see how some fans don't assume this is Master Xehanort with his potential prime, since this fight is intense as heck. The music to this fight, Forza dell'Oscurità, translates into Forces of Darkness, excuse my bad Italian, which is in turn a remix of Forza di Male and Darkness of the Unknown, the 2 theme songs for both Ansem and Xemnas, so... yeah, it's not confirmed, but come on, if it talks like a duck and walks like a duck, it's probably Donald Duck. This is where the real fight begins. No Heart has over 7 HP meters and is one of the fastest enemies in the game in terms of sheer damage output. It can sonic impact around, kick darkness waves at you, can summon corridors of darkness, can still fire off Darkness Blast and Keyblades, and is generally relentless in terms of constantly doing some move with very little breaks in between. That's not to say this fight isn't fair. I technically cheese this with a deck of various Surges and Kiragas with a Secret Mind or 2 depending on my mood and melding, but I also sneak in regular attacks between the constant cartwheeling in this case. This is mainly because the fight is otherwise a frantic back and forth between surges, the occasional shot lock, and healing every other move. And does No Heart have the moves? Even compared to how the Wayfinder trio can handle their Keyblades, No Heart's alchemic mastery over his Keyblade is unreal. Here are some of the forms it uses. Since this fight happened so fast, I don't blame anyone for not catching all these while they're trying to survive. No Heart can transform his weapon into both gauntlets and greaves to punch and kick in swift combos, a pincer to grab the player Darth Vader style that you should immediately break out of if you're caught in, a gun to fire dark projectiles from, a shield, and a swordless hilt version in the first phase. Heck, we even see its glider form, which is essentially a badass demonic wings to personally fly around the stage while still dive bombing the player. You will never not be repositioning yourself in this fight in some way to keep up with this battle. Among his more troublesome moves are his ability to summon this weird distortion of space and time, according to the wiki, since these aren't official names at all, since apparently they can't find them, which, if caught in, either slows your character movement speed to a virtual crawl, or speed you up considerably, both equally catching a new player off guard. He can also summon this Mega Flare Cross Heartless Angel move that sets your character's HP to 1 and immediately drains your focus gauge and sets all your commands into the reload phase, so an elixir is your best friend here, like your fights against Sephiroth. This fight is one of my favorites given how hectic it is, and while the game does give you a bonus time limit of 25 minutes, it takes me on average 7 to 8 on successful runs, but I do abuse the surges and Seeker Mines, including the Rhythm Mixer command style for massive damage, so maybe my advice is kinda cheap, but I truly wonder how this fight is for normal people who don't play on critical and normally aren't facing truly relentless enemies that require you to either be completely aggressive and or know how to bide their time spamming iframes. Victory will grant the player the Keyblade Royal Radiance, an exceedingly powerful Keyblade that might only prove really useful against one other fight, and that's where we head back towards where the story began. Full disclosure, I consider this sequel to Superboss to be the toughest fight in the entire series for me, for reasons that will hopefully become apparent in the footage and descriptions I give for this battle. For story purposes, this one is canon. According to the director, all 3 characters return to the land of departure post-destruction and before they head off to the Keyblade Graveyard. They each then face this mysterious figure cloaked in the iconic black cloak, but for simplicity's sake I'm going to refer to Aqua in this scenario. This enigma appears from nothing, brandishing a glowing dagger in each hand, kicking off the frantic music and beginning the most frustrating fight I've ever had in this series. Now, this guy is fast and cheap all in one. If you land most basic hits on him, and I did believe this was a he at the time given the build, it has a chance to completely freeze you in place as he seems to rewind his time to reposition himself for another attack while you continue your now undone hit, so keep this quirk in mind. He goes from walking calmly around to warping in and charging at you, so be ready to commit to an attack once you initiate one or immediately dive out of the way. His basic combos are either a shorter one that can still take out a majority of your HP, or a ridiculously long one that is guaranteed to leave you with 1 HP with the proper abilities equipped. And considering how quickly and fluidly this guy can start chaining in attacks, you need to learn exactly when to heal and when to attack. For it's not as simple as it was for No Heart. Catch this enemy in a combo too much and he'll begin to use a renewal block, so you'll actually be healing him eventually. This led me to time out my surges to minimize this counter, but that's not the worst of your problems. This mysterious figure can transform his weapons into a sort of spear as well, can cross them into a slash and send out a homing X-shaped energy thing, and can use it as a whip to suck the player in before cheaply attacking them, though this can be broken out of with an air slide in the final mix versions, thank goodness. This was essentially a cheap instant game over on the vanilla versions, so I'm not sad that this was changed. He can cloak himself in a Raging Storm attack, 3 pillars of fire lasting a couple of seconds that should be dodged or surged through, a whirlwind attack that knocks out your command deck out into the playing field, of course, and can send out orbs that attempt to pierce the player in several intervals. If this wasn't enough, the unknown assailant can also clone himself into 5 copies, all behaving independently of each other and generally being a nuisance as they tend to try and trap the player in a situation where one will combo them into a wall, one using the X-Cross attack and others will fill in the various gaps. This is where surges are extremely helpful in surviving, since any good shot will cause the 4 clones to dissipate, but it's strongly advised to avoid healing until you've either dealt with the clones or have been waiting long enough for them to eventually disappear. To make matters worse, once you've dealt with about half of his HP, he can begin to go invisible, in which case you cannot lock into him and he can still wallop you. He then can begin throwing multiple attacks at you at once, leading to an insane combination of attacks designed to make you hate yourself if you're playing as Terra. Additional moves include Meteor, Mega Flare, and Doom, and when he can combine his Vanishing Act with multiple copies running around and orbs trying to pierce you in a whirlwind knocking out your commands because you slipped up and missed a cartwheel, you are in for a fight that demands you know what you're doing at all times, and can still come in crashing down when the AI decides you made one mistake and then capitalizes upon it. At the end of this fight, no matter how you eventually go about it, the mysterious figure will disappear, reappear once again, the hero ready to fight more, before completely vanishing, the encounter likely making the player wonder what the heck just happened. This then allows the player to traverse the ruined land of departure for the chests in the world. I should mention that this unknown cannot be fought until you've defeated the Vanitas Remnant, which is its own brand of tough, but if you ask me, the mysterious figure is the worst fight in the series for me, in terms of how you're expected to handle it, the unpredictable nature of the AI, and how it can combine various moves to royally tick you off and make you see that game over screen more than once. I fought this thing for an hour before the footage I'm showing you here got recorded, so even though I knew what was coming, I can still fatally mess up. The reward for defeating the Enigma is the no-name Keyblade, an extremely powerful weapon that's really only meant to show off, hit into the future, and deal great amount of damage for any remaining end and post-game content. We'll deal with who this may be in the lore section, but for now let's indulge in fate and head off to the place where all Keyblade wielders leave their mark on fate. We appear for the third time at the Keyblade Graveyard, fast-forwarding to Aqua's fight with Braig. He acts identically to his fight with Terra, something that should be trivial for Aqua and her mastery over various magics by this point in time, hopefully. Once the fight is dealt with, we have Ventus attempting to warn Aqua before Vanitas knocks her out from above. A few minutes later, Aqua awakens to find Mickey watching over her, having finally caught up to the events. Aqua looks over to see Ven standing alone, so overjoyed to see her friend apparently safe that she's seemingly oblivious to the mysterious Keyblade he's now wielding. As she attempts to get a response, Mickey's instincts kick in, narrowly defending her from an attack from a yellow-eyed Ventus wielding the Keyblade. Vanitas confirms he's now possessing Ventus after having merged together during their mental battle, monologuing about the intent of using the Keyblade to trigger another Keyblade war, attempting to lure remaining Keyblade wielders out there to open the door to Kingdom Hearts. Sick of all this nonsense, Aqua teams up with Mickey to battle Vanitas, who fights as he did during his battle with Ven inside their dive to the heart, and with a decent amount of magic commands, Aqua shouldn't have much trouble fending off the fused antagonist before a cutscene continues the story. Knocking Aqua and Mickey out, Vanitas attempts to use the incomplete Keyblade to finish her off, but not before Aqua wishes on her Wayfinder to give her strength from Terra and Ven. Acquiescing, they seem to help charge her Keyblade, the upgraded Stormfall in my footage here, powerful enough to clash with Vanitas' incomplete Keyblade, eventually cracking it. This causes the ultimate key to begin firing off rays of light from its injury, Mickey remarking its erratic nature as they try to withstand the blast of energy emanating from the weapon. Throwing out Keyblade emblems as waves of light violently erupt from the sword, Aqua reaches out for Ventus, who is freed from Vanitas' control after his internal fight with his darker half. As a powerful gust blows Ven outside the arena, Aqua dives in after him, the Keyblade engulfing the graveyard in the same light that caused Xehanort to vanish. Later on, Mickey successfully warps Aqua and Ventus to the mysterious tower, Aqua immediately asking about what happened. Yensid confirms Terra had vanished and Ventus' heart appears to be sleeping, as if his heart is completely left, cautioning Aqua that he may remain comatose forever at this rate. Vowing to keep him safe, Aqua thinks back to all the connections she's made during her journey, Yensid encouraging her that as long as she loves him, Ven can follow her light back to the realm of light when he awakens. Mickey agrees, claiming he also believes in Ven, though is doubtful when Aqua says Terra's light will also assist in their friend's recovery, considering that he may be gone for good. Aqua remains undeterred, pulling out her Wayfinder, hoping she knows how to find her missing friend. The third set of credits then roll as we now unlock the final episode. So now we know why Aqua was the suggested third perspective. She's the only one in any position to continue beyond the events of that clash in the Keyblade Graveyard. Before we do that, let's do my usual thing and attempt to break apart and organize all the lore and continuity connections, because I try to be as thorough as possible, and there are a ton of things to clarify before we finally push beyond to the real ending.
Terra's gone. Maybe for good.
I think I know how to find him.
While I've been sprinkling in a bunch of nods towards the returning characters, cameos, and solved mysteries, now's the time where continuity lockout begins to rear its bloated head in this section. The four-finger gloves come off here, so let's dive into this. First off, the game's got another form of text documents that are gained throughout all three campaigns, as variously obtained rewards. The first game had the Ansem reports, the mainline sequel had the secret Ansem reports, so it's no surprise to learn that Birth by Sleep now has the straightforward Xehanort's report this time around. I will once again go through them chronologically for clarification, as they're once again a great lead into the various lore behind the mythology of the series, and are a perfect jumping off points to various aspects of the prequel. It's also nudged by the game to at least be given a glance, since all 13 are required to unlock the final episode in the first place. Xehanort's letter is the first document, and chronicles Master Xehanort's reply to being invited by Master Ericus to witness his two pupils Terra and Aqua reach the mark of Master. He is seen, however falsely, apologizing for their feud years earlier, and how he's harmed him over their differing opinions on the Keyblade War. Xehanort seems to somewhat respect Ericus here, while it's revealed that they are indeed fellow pupils, going so far as to consider him a brother. It's up to the audience to determine how much of this is sincere and how much of this was simply in order to get his plans moving forward. Xehanort continues his response by reporting on the unversed threat, something he's very well responsible for, and wonders if he's heard of them from Yensid. He then moves on to discussing how he's uncertain about the darkness in Terra's heart despite the natural power he possesses, something Xehanort knew Ericus would agree with, seeing how averse to the darkness he knew his friend was. Suggesting the traditional examination, he then agrees to humbly respect what Ericus deems as necessary, suggesting this two-phase examination Ericus held for Terra and Aqua to partake in is just one of many methods. It gives those brief glances at how Jedi-like Keyblade wielders seem to echo, alongside the whole light and darkness motifs in general. Regarding Masters, once a Keyblade wielder shows the mark of mastery, the new Master is then given one of two roads to follow, Successor or Seeker. If one is picked as a successor, presumably from the Keyblade wielder's master, as Ericus was, then the Keyblade Master is allowed to reshape the world as they see fit. This explains some of the chain motifs sitting around the Land of Departure, which we'll learn is still very special in terms of where it sits in the universe. More on this soon. If one is passed on as successor, then they are given the role of Seeker, in which case you can wander around the wider world to find their own path, as Xehanort did. I think we're to assume that Mickey's Mark of Mastery was also being held around this time, as he's outfitted in that black outfit similar to Sora's in Kingdom Hearts 2, and he does mention that he's training under Master Yen Sid for, quote, more training. So I think he's becoming a Keyblade Master at this point. It's vague, and he is a Master by the time the first game rolls around anyways. I just felt I should point it out since the game doesn't explicitly define this. From there, let's talk about the various methods of traversal, since how characters cross over into other worlds has always been a little sticking point to Kingdom Hearts, especially when on a clearly defined timeline here. We're finally given a name to the world map, as it were, as Xehanort addresses this as the Ocean Between. Alongside the return and continued use of Corridors of Darkness, which beings who have been given themselves over to the darkness can summon, it's shown that the lanes between are pathways unlocked by Keyblade Masters that act as special roads between the various worlds. The portals of them are sort of the light side equivalent to the corridors, and Keyblade armor is here to help protect wielders from the intensified darkness in these roads. Interestingly, Mickey this time has a Star Shard, which some may recognize as a gummy block, since I couldn't figure out what else it could have been. Despite the name, gummy blocks aren't always strict blocks, as you can edit the ships yourself in the mainline numbered entries, so a star-shaped crystal isn't out of the realm of possibility as a geometric shape. My question comes from, where did this come from? Since the impassable walls surrounding the separate worlds have not been thoroughly broken at this point in time. That's something that Xehanort eventually does around a year from now when he discovers Radiant Garden's keyhole and opens the door, which then causes meteor showers and shooting stars to fall down in the form of gummies that characters would then make into ships. Call me crazy, but Mickey's Star Shard seems to be more solid than the rubbery elastic texture most are said to have. It seems this could be a more natural state of a gummy since the walls haven't come down yet, so this may have been something that simply randomly fell from Disney Castle/Town's barrier? Maybe some need to be manufactured or something to be used properly as ships, since the Star Shard seems to activate randomly, since Mickey doesn't understand its power. See, this is why it hurts to overthink lore sometimes. There's no clear answer to this, as far as I can tell, as minor as this seems. So while the Star Shard is something of an enigma, the Keyblade armor concept is something that Master Xehanort addresses. Having been taught by him and Ericus' master that the darkness was something to be feared, Xehanort began questioning why. Xehanort in general always has had an inquisitive mind even as a youth on Destiny Island, sharing his boyhood homeworld with Sora and Riku in a fun twist of fate. When learning about the Keyblade, Xehanort was taught by the precepts that Keyblades were to protect the light by darkness from the shadows. This answer wasn't satisfactory for Xehanort, who began to form into the character we know today. As he began to sneak out and visit other worlds, something that was normally forbidden, Xehanort begins to forego his Keyblade armor once he was able to feel the power the darkness held. He wasn't afraid of being swallowed up by darkness if he could control it after all, and has been harboring an affinity for darkness for decades ever since, when we take into consideration that he was a boy when he left Destiny Islands, though I think it's commonly understood that he was likely in his teens just like the other protagonists were. Though we'll get into the implications of Xehanort's gambit soon enough, and how it's helped redefine a few aspects of the lore for me. After reaffirming the adage of world travelers to not inform those who cannot travel between worlds that other worlds even exist, Xehanort proceeds to give the fairy tale Cayu's grandmother says some more truth. Speaking of ancient times, the greater world was once whole, where no invisible barriers barred them from each other, and was bathed in an abundance of light. The later details were understood to be actual history. Keyblade bearers would eventually squabble over ownership of this light, and thus the Keyblade War was held over the coveted Kingdom Hearts, the aggregate of all hearts. This battle swept up all corners of the world for various reasons, including defenders of light, denizens of the darkness, innocents caught up in the middle, and those who simply craved the power. This conflict ended without the door to Kingdom Hearts ever being opened, with the lights of children that remained helping to restore the greater world as separated worlds, protected from each other with invisible walls so the war could not be repeated. This is where Xehanort comes in. While he's heard of the other Keyblade wielders outside of his own sphere of influence, he has not seen them, since the universe is divided into the Realm of Light, where most beings reside, the Realm of Darkness, which was expressly forbidden to Xehanort and other Keyblade wielders, since it's been said that nobody who's entered has ever returned, and the Realm Between, where a few special worlds reside, including this game's hub world, the Land of Departure. Xehanort then reintroduces the three categories of Keyblade. Keyblades of Light and Darkness only differ in where they are found, as Keyblades of Darkness are simply found in their corresponding realm as counterparts to those found in the Realm of Light. The third are Keyblades of Heart, which can be forged when 7 hearts of pure light are gathered, which can then open the way to Kingdom Hearts behind the door to darkness. This would presumably grant someone complete control over all worlds and people. The one to open the door would emerge reborn as something greater than human, and capable of creating the next world. All of these ring familiar to returning fans of the series. Xehanort then reports his excitement discovering the fourth type of Keyblade, spelled with the X-shaped letter Key, or Kai. While normal Keyblades are man-made constructs, the Keyblade instead coexists with Kingdom Hearts, forgeable only when a being of pure light clashes against pure darkness. Compared to the Kingdom Hearts brought about forcibly by men or artificially gathered, the Keyblade summons the true Kingdom Hearts, a perfect and complete union of the hearts of all worlds. This is what Xehanort was convinced the Keyblade War was fought over, and why he's orchestrated events to trigger another war and see what lies beyond it. By creating the Keyblade and summoning his true Kingdom Hearts, all worlds will instantly be brought together regardless of the walls between them. Reminiscing further on the ideological differences between himself and Ericus, Xehanort further jots down his belief that the world should be truly balanced, his talk with Terra about wielding light and darkness in equal shares ringing more true than initially thought than more might have suspected. Since Ericus thinks in absolutes and sees darkness as something that must be eradicated by light, Xehanort scoffs at this notion, since the brightest lights will always cast the darkest shadows. As his ideology and knowledge began to get the better of him over the years as a seeker, Xehanort was realizing his time was nearing an end, his curiosity unsated, and was unsatisfied in having to leave behind all of his unanswered questions to die in an old, brittle vessel. Determined to not go out quietly, this is where Xehanort began scheming to get all the options available to him. He confirms that Keyblade Masters have unique abilities in regards to hearts. This is shown when he extracted the darkness from Ventus's heart. Keyblade Masters can extract hearts from themselves and others. This would allow Xehanort to fulfill the dream of many an ambitious character. A method to extend his life, mild immortality if you will, could theoretically be attained by transferring his own heart into a younger, stronger vessel. Ever since he was a young lad stuck on his small islands, Xehanort dreamed of traveling far and wide to discover a world no one had ever set foot in. With the true Kingdom Hearts satisfying that dream, Xehanort would be able to open the door and create his next world, where light and darkness would exist in perfect balance. This is where Ventus entered the picture. Xehanort had taken him in as his pupil with the intention of using his body as his new vessel. While he sensed potential in the youth, then didn't have the constitution for the rigorous training required for Plan A, so Xehanort switched to Plan B. Split the boy's heart in two, one of pure light and darkness, with the intention to at least create the Keyblade to summon Kingdom Hearts. However, the ordeal that created Vanitas had the darker half take too much of Ventus's heart, and the boy began drifting into sleep, his light fading away. Not without mercy, Xehanort took the boy back to his childhood home so Ven could spend his final moments in peace. Xehanort looked upon the beaches where he had decided to leave his tiny place so many years ago. Reflecting on how time seemed to march in place here, his islands virtually unchanged decades later, Xehanort began to leave when he turned around and saw Ventus's light hadn't left, as he saw in the opening. Realizing he could not teach Ventus for fear that Vanitas would sap all of his remaining power, Xehanort instead left Ven with his old friend Ericus, expecting some resistance, but instead receiving a warm welcome despite all of their disagreements. Ericus would ensure Ven's light would strengthen thanks to his absolute devotion to the light, allowing Xehanort to buy time and wait for the day Ventus's light began matching Vanitas' dark strength. Satisfied with the arrangement, Xehanort also saw that his friend had found 2 pupils since he had left. One of them, Terra, was a well-intentioned youth with the almost single-minded search for power. This was all that Xehanort needed for a potential vessel, as we now know what eventually transpired. As Ericus had sent a letter to his brother pupil regarding the time for his pupils to ascend to Keyblade Masters, Xehanort also had Vanitas to confirm his suspicions. Since Vanitas shared a link with Ventus, he could sense the other boy's thoughts to a degree. His devotion to Terra would be just the catalyst they needed to ensure all 3 would leave the Land of Departure, to ensure Ventus would match Vanitas for his coveted Keyblade. And so ends Xehanort's report, and time to cover all the remaining lore shenanigans and connections to the other titles before we resume the finale. While some of these mysteries cannot be fully answered here yet, as we do have the true ending of the game ahead of us, I feel it was important to have all the background information thanks to Xehanort's report firmly in everyone's mind as I cover a few of the reveals, remaining mysteries, and implications going forward, since Birth by Sleep ends with quite a few revelations. I'll begin with a few answers the prequel has officially revealed, both clearly and subtly. First off is the bequeathing, the act of granting another strong-willed individual the ability to use the Keyblade. Terra very clearly performs the ceremony for Riku, passing over Sora as the intended wielder, while Kairi was able to simply touch Aqua's Keyblade to gain the ability to wield Destiny's Embrace 11 years later. This leaves how Sora was granted the ability, but we'll soon get to this. It's nice to finally learn a bit more about Keyblades this time around. One aspect that would soon be explored upon in a future title, and hinted at previously, are Keyblades that can level up in form. In regards to Terra and Aqua, their original Keyblades get upgraded forms after meeting with Sora and Riku on Destiny Islands. Terra's Earthshaker becomes his more signature Ends of the Earth, while Aqua's Rainfell transforms into her Stormfall in time for the ending. This was previously hinted at, with Riku's Soul Eater being an intermediary form for his eventual Way to the Dawn Keyblade, and this would become a bigger gameplay feature in a future title. But for now, we are also introduced to the Keyblade, which is 2 Kingdom Keys mixed with an Ultima Keyblade to form a fancy weapon vaguely resembling the Dream Sword. While the Keyblade was incomplete, we haven't seen the last of this important key to the true Kingdom Hearts. Breaking off on a small related tangent, Vanitas was the source of all Unversed with the main goal of strengthening up Ventus for the creation of the Keyblade. What I didn't mention earlier was that in the post-game, Final Mix added Unversed missions. These emblems resemble absent silhouettes and show up once you complete the world's episodes for each protagonist. They're similar to Mushroom 13 in that they each present a specific challenge and grade you on your performance on a 3-star rating system. 5 of the 9 missions reward you with an illusion command for meeting the 3-star requirement, which transforms you temporarily into one of 5 Unversed, changing your command deck accordingly. The challenges are all varied and aren't nearly as frustrating as number 8 from Mushroom 13 was, so while I didn't do them this time around, they are amusing little asides. Absolutely for novelty's sake, and I honestly forget they exist until I try to 100% the Trilogy archive, sure, but they are things you can do to get the most out of the game as interesting challenges. Unversed in general are nice compliments to the Heartless and Nobodies in terms of varying up the style of monster Mook here, since Heartless haven't invaded the Realm of Light yet, despite Master Xehanort using some Neo Shadows to push Ventus harder than he was ready for. There's still a few remaining mysteries and reveals that I've skirted around, even if the game's given enough hints to put them together now, but I will split this section into 2 categories this time around, since Birth by Sleep has the playable secret ending for its Final Mix version. So for now, we'll resume with the finale and address all the ending revelations and answers the game will implicitly and explicitly give us later. As a side note, the Trilogy Archives also houses a handy timeline feature for anyone to see exactly how all these events piece together. With a bunch of things out of the way, let's finally dive into the final episode proper. Coming right off the ending of Aqua's story, she is seen leaving Yensid's tower carrying a comatose Ven on her back. Wondering where he'd be safest, Ven subconsciously summons his Keyblade, accessing a gate to a world he wishes to go to. Passing through the Door of Light, Aqua sees she's been brought to the land of departure, in complete ruins after Xehanort's assault. Sadly recollecting her failed promise to Ericus, Aqua picks up her fallen master's Keyblade, making her way into the main chamber. Setting Ven atop the empty middle throne, Aqua recalls one of her new duties as master. Ericus' words echoing in her mind, Aqua reminds herself of a secret she must now utilize. This world, a sacred neutral ground that resides in perfect equilibrium in terms of light and darkness. In order to protect this land, should something have happened to him and Darkness is in danger of abusing this world, Aqua was earlier ordered by Ericus to seal the world away as one of the further instructions he passed on to her. Using the Master Defender, Aqua summons the Land of Departure's keyhole, using her master's Keyblade to transform the world, causing all who enter to be lost to oblivion. Light flooding the room, Aqua opens her eyes to find Ven on a solitary throne in a chamber of blinding white, adorned with the mark of mastery connected by illuminated chains. Claiming he'll be lonely but safe, Aqua leaves her sleeping friend as she leaves the transformed building, looking back upon what will be known in the future as Castle Oblivion. Hearing Terra asking her to put an end to him, gotta love that flowery censoring, Aqua is directed towards Radiant Garden, surrounded by an intense dark aura as she touches down in the central square in the dead of night. Spotting a silver-haired Terra standing alone, Aqua approaches him as Terra lifts her into the air, asking who he is. Sensing his intense possessor's darkness, Xehanort lowers Aqua as Master Xehanort resumes control, summoning his own Keyblade and claiming Terra's heart has been taken over by his own inner darkness. Aqua brandishes her own Keyblade, addressing herself as Master, and begins to fight for her friend's freedom as a fantastic remix of Ansem and Terra's theme kicks in. This first phase is no different from the fight Lingering Will had against him in Will's cage at the end of Terra's story, but once he's defeated, Xehanort will summon his shadowy other, and the second and final phase will begin. Behaving near identically as Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, did at the end of the first Kingdom Hearts, Aqua must first avoid the other numerous dark attacks, including shockwaves from beneath and long-range darkness attacks from afar. Occasionally, if she is grabbed by the Guardian, Aqua will be transported into a brightly lit area with Terra standing a fair distance away. If she can cartwheel past the Guardian's various attacks, Aqua can then team up with the stationary Terra and trigger the Dual Limit reaction command, which deals a major amount of damage and is an ace way to end the main game. Encouraging Terra to fight against Xehanort's control, Xehanort eventually turns the Keyblade on himself, locking his heart away and causing the Guardian to dissolve into a puddle of darkness. Unconscious, Xehanort falls backwards into the void, Aqua diving in after him. After reaching him and summoning her glider, Aqua realizes that she won't be able to save the both of them in time as it begins to close. Detaching herself from her Keyblade armor, Aqua gives it her Keyblade and uses the last bit of energy she has, sending it off with Terra, sacrificing herself as she drifts further into the darkness. Meanwhile, Riku and Sora are stargazing on distant islands before beginning to head back inside. Riku asks Sora why he's crying, something the 4-year-old is at a loss for words for, as he feels a sort of squeezing sensation inside himself. Reminding the audience that each star in the sky is another world, Riku suggests that someone out there must be hurting, and is now asking Sora for help. Following Riku's strange advice, Sora opens his heart up and reaches out to a sleeping Ventus. The next morning, Braig is leading Ansem the Wise alongside Dylan to an unconscious but rescued Xehanort. Asking his name, Ansem receives Xehanort as an answer, Braig smiling at the result. As he picks up the amnesiac, Braig gestures Dylan to pick up Aqua's discarded Keyblade and armor. Cutting to the realm of darkness, Aqua is confronted by multiple Darkseid and is contemplating giving up and resigning to fading into the darkness, having been down here for who knows how long. Before the Heartless can strike, they are defeated by Terra and Ven's Keyblades, connected by her Wayfinder. Remarking how she'd almost forgotten how to smile, she remembers all of the characters she's met alongside her journey as she pulls out her Wayfinder. Holding on to that hope, the game cuts to the final credits sequence as simple and clean plays, hopefully reminding returning players of the events of Kingdom Hearts that will occur in a decade's time. But wait, there's more. Near the latter half of the 13-minute-long credits, the game does the usual check up on the supporting cast thing. Of particular note are a shot of Lee and Isa being thrown out of the front gates of Ansem Castle before buying some ice cream from Scrooge McDuck, their plans still a mystery to us all. Saga is also seen in Olympus Coliseum, disappearing after noticing someone, a single black feather all that remains. We later spotted dejected Mickey handing over his Starseeker Keyblade, assuming he's failed in his rash attempt to prove himself a master. Yensid instead returns the Keyblade to him, passing his impromptu mark of mastery perhaps? The mini-scenes then end with a young Kairi looking up into the sky, her charm gleaming with Aqua's protective spell. Finally switching to Sora's dive to the heart, Sora then greets Ventus's heart, recognizing and thanking the 4-year-old for giving him a second chance when he needed it the most. Now forced to go back to sleep, Sora accepts Ven's heart within his own, giving him a place to rest, telling Riku it seems to have worked. The game then shows off Terra, Ventus, and Aqua's stars, a silent narration reminding the audience that they would eventually come to save the multitude of worlds they were looking upon in due time.
Darkness rules your heart. It gives me control. Muscle and sinew that once obeyed you now rebels against you. How you can remain here at all confounds the mind.
This is now where most would expect a secret ending, since all but Days has had one. Instead of the CGI teaser the first 2 number games presented, Birth by Sleep instead houses a secret episode, which contains the original secret ending and extends it in Final Mix, so let's not waste any time tackling this true ending named Blank Points. Labeled Hidden Truths, it begins with Terra and Master Xehanort's hearts having a discussion within their shared vessel. The old man wonders how Terra can still remain after succumbing to his own darkness, Terra responding that this is still his heart and body. Xehanort then sees why his new vessel is so confident. Master Ericus's heart resides within Terra's, assisting his pupil in resisting total possession. While the Keyblade Master compliments Terra's bravery, he is undeterred by the roadblock, claiming he is a very patient man and that Terra is just one of many roads that he may decide to take. We then cut to Xehanort as one of Ansem the Wise's apprentices, Braig coming up to the man without much more than a name. Asking Xehanort to drop the cliché, the sharpshooter cautiously asks if he's instead addressing Terra, Xehanort not acknowledging the name, Braig nevertheless claiming he's got Xehanort's back. On the other side of the hall, Ansem is walking with his youngest apprentice Ienzo, the two of them sharing some sea salt ice cream. Stopping, Ienzo looks back, Ansem following suit as he spots Xehanort and Brake walking side by side, the opening words to this section ringing true about the image of their backs preserved in memory. We then turn towards the two that were never meant to meet, as Aqua approaches a hooded Ansem the Wise on the dark margin. Asking the black-coated man how he came to the realm of darkness, Ansem replies that his memory has faded, much like the last time, confirming this is the second time he's visited the Dark Shore after being banished by his apprentices, implying a time jump to after his sacrifice in Kingdom Hearts 2. Aqua confirms that she has been wandering around for a long, unspecified amount of time without any luck of finding her way back into the realm of light, and to rescue her friends. Ansem then begins to recall a boy he once knew when Aqua mentions friends. When asking if the boy who traveled across many worlds to protect the light with a Keyblade in hand was Terra or Ven, Ansem confirms it was neither of them. Saying he met the boy probably over a year ago, Ansem proceeds to remember his actions, how he used and hurt his friends and felt his being here once again was a means to atone for his actions and putting the worlds in danger. He wonders aloud if his inquisitive mind as a scientist is what made him put the results of his research into the boy during his long sleep. Ansem concludes that this was likely a means of clearing his conscience, hoping it would one day help right the wrongs of all those whose lives he has managed to ruin. He then says that so many are waiting for their birth by sleep, a new beginning. Aqua then asks what the boy's name is, the phrase "all the pieces lie where they fell" transitioning us into a myriad of scenes. With Birth by Sleep's somber rendition of Dearly Beloved playing in the background, we are shown the familiar mansion in the outskirts of Twilight Town, Naminé naming Sora as she finishes a drawing of him watching a sunset. We then cut to the world of Perpetual Sundown, of Xion, Roxas, and Axel atop the clock tower eating sea salt ice cream, the trio echoing Sora's name. Terra then awakens a sleeping Ven in the intact park bench on the Land of Departure, both smiling and saying Sora's name back as they look upon a shooting star. Returning to the dark margin, Aqua then sheds tears as she repeats Sora's name, overjoyed that the boy she met so long ago has stepped up to defend the Realm of Light in her absence, all the characters hoping that he will rescue them where they wait for him. On Destiny Islands, Sora is seen having read the King's letter at the end of Kingdom Hearts 2, Riku and Kairi approaching him to end the scene.
Yeah.
Sora.
Kairi. It's just, they really need me. I have to go. I am who I am. Because of them.
See you soon.
That was the note where the original game left us off on, a bittersweet one looking towards the future with the hope of Sora helping save all the numerous heroes that have been left behind in one way or another. But Final Mix now introduces the proper secret episode, showing the opening of Kingdom Hearts before Kairi wakes him up, and rewinding before Sora spoke with Ansem the Wise, the game displays 1, 0, point, and then showing 0.5. This is Kingdom Hearts speak for saying a fragmentary passage here takes place between the events of Birth by Sleep and Kingdom Hearts, as we see what transpired with Aqua's stint in the Kingdom Hearts equivalent of Hell. Resuming after Terra and Ven's Keyblades help reinvigorate her hope, Aqua sees her Wayfinder fading, glancing up to see a geyser of darkness erupt into the sky and entering a portal of light. This is where the player is given control of Aqua to explore the realm of darkness as a surprise final world. Aqua retains whatever commands you had at the end of her story and in turn the final episode, equipped with a Master Defender, having sent off her own Keyblade to save Terra. Since the unversed threat is gone with Vanitas' defeat, Aqua instead runs into Pureblood Heartless, since they called the Dark Realm their home. This world is made up of 3 large zones, and Aqua must navigate around and use various singularities, for lack of a better word, to platform higher up the world. Shadows, Dark Balls, and Neo Shadows will challenge Aqua when approaching certain darkness portals, providing themselves an actual threat again as they are a multitude times stronger than most unversed in the game. With the right setup and powerful commands, they won't prove too much of a threat, but keep your wits about you. They do have the advantage of numbers in some of these confrontations. After doing some exploring a bit, defeating Heartless to create these organic structures as platforms, Aqua eventually unlocks a hive of darkness, where a swarm of Heartless will ambush her all at once, so use your wide-reaching commands, styles, limits, everything you have here, especially on Proud and Critical. It's satisfying to mow down this many enemies, especially since Rhythm Mixer is particularly effective once you've gathered all of Aqua's stickers. The final area, beyond a save point, a warning to any RPG player worth their salt, holds a massive and feral pureblood Heartless by the name of Darkhide. Its introduction is brilliant. We first see Aqua walking into the arena through the pulsating red vision of the Heartless before it ambushes the wandering Keyblade Master. Collecting herself, Aqua confirms that these monsters she's been fighting aren't unversed, a nice little detail since she'd have no way of knowing what a Heartless is as the final boss fight of the game begins. Darkhide is fought in 3 phases, and it feels great to face an actual Heartless threat again after a game full of Unversed, or maybe 2 if you don't have access to the DS versions of Days and haven't fought one since Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. No matter the case, Darkhide hits hard and fast, the first phase having it first spot Aqua, the camera shifting its vision once more, as the player must either cartwheel away, block, or attempt to attack the invisible threat. Its eye's the only thing visible here. The second stage is where it decloaks and properly fights, upping its aggressiveness and revealing itself to look like a more monstrous Heartless in the vein of Dark Thorn with a more red mane and chains. It does the usual bestial swipes and charges you'd expect from it, some of its attacks also being fire-themed, able to fire a Mega Flare and after images that can all harm Aqua in the final 2 phases. This is where you should abuse all of your iframe options. Phantom Drive, Blade Charge, and especially Rhythm Mixer are my usual go-to styles here, alongside wide-reaching magic and Seeker Mines, so any charge attempt done by the boss usually fills up my meter, allowing for an invincible finisher when I'm not cartwheeling away from damage. After Aqua does her worst and puts down the creature, she is shocked to find what looks like the Castle of Dreams, the game then wresting control from the player and presenting the final flashes of content. In quick succession we see Mickey traveling through the realm of darkness with Starseeker in hand, Riku on Big Ben with an unconscious Kairi in his arms, Donald and Goofy wandering Traverse Town, Kingdom Hearts 2 Kairi with Hayner, Pence, and Olette in front of the mansion in Twilight Town, Diz doing data things in front of a sleeping Sora, Riku looking down upon Roxas and Shion in Twilight Town, before finally cutting to a younger Xehanort on Destiny Islands, turning around and changing into Ansem, Xemnas, and finally a glimpse of Master Xehanort before Zor and Ven both vanish. Birth by Sleep Volume 2 ending the rapid-fire epilogue. Where do I even begin breaking down all the information presented in the final chunk of Birth by Sleep? If that was a lot, don't worry. I'm here to make sure you guys get caught up on everything, as I'm finally free to talk about every last detail without any restrictions now. Allow me to go through these as best I can. First of all, let's talk about Ventus's fate and in turn his connections to Sora and Vanitas. First of all, Vanitas looking like Sora. This is because when Ventus's heart was fractured, his heart was found by a new heart, which was when Sora was born. When Sora's heart kept Ven from slipping into darkness, this in turn imprinted on Vanitas, who was apparently born without a set face when he was created, despite having Sora's voice when he was created, but that was probably for the game. Had anyone else assisted Ven, Vanitas would have adopted their face and voice instead. I think most of us are happy with Mirror Mirror Sora being Vanitas' face. So about Ventus, Sora was able to claim and use the Kingdom Key without a proper bequeathing during the destruction of Destiny Islands in the first game because he already had the heart of Ventus inside him. This allowed Sora to wield the Keyblade instead of Riku once his friend gave into the darkness, causing the Keyblade to select Sora instead. This also had an implied solution regarding Sora's nobody. Turns out, Roxas came out looking like the other heart within Sora. Since Ventus's heart remained with Sora's soul and body, this resemblance is something Axel, Xigbar, and Xemnas probably recognized on various levels during the events of Days in Kingdom Hearts 2. And because Sora has 2 hearts, this is also how he can dual wield. As to where Ventus ended up, it turns out we now know why nobody was able to fully explore Castle Oblivion. Nobody can besides Aqua, who locked Ventus's body away in what is now recognized as the Chamber of Waking. By the time Xemnas was created after Ansem's apprentices gave themselves over to darkness and had their Heartless and Nobodies form afterwards, he was seen conversing with Aqua's discarded armor and Keyblade in the constructed Chamber of Repose. This aspect is a bit fuzzier on concrete details and requires knowledge from the various reports throughout the 3 mainline games, but I always assumed that this was due to Xemnas being the remaining body and soul of Xehanort the Apprentice. Xemnas, aka Xehanort's nobody, is literally and actually Terra's body. By extension, I believed that Xemnas had recollections of half of his constitution as Terra, why he was addressing Aqua's armor as a friend, and partially why he was interested in finding where his other friend, Ventus, was hidden in the Chamber of Waking. Xehanort's other half simply probably wanted it for the Keyblade. While we're on Xemnas, a bunch of his quirks are now given more concrete explanations. The naming ceremony that the Superior conducts on nobodies that he inducts into Organization 13 is an anagram of the nobody's original persona with an X inserted in there. We can now see that this X is basically a remnant of Master Xehanort's fascination with the Keyblade. Fun fact, the letter Key/Kai is a Greek letter, so it's an actual thing Nomura drew for influencing Kingdom Hearts. That dude's a madman helming this franchise. And this is how I smoothly transition into Ansem and Xemnas as a whole. Turns out, Master Xehanort wasn't kidding about Terra simply being one of the plans he had set up for himself. While I wasn't sure if Master Xehanort was aware of how casting aside your heart would eventually create a heartless and nobody, as Terranort ended up doing, his presence was sure felt even 11 years after Birth by Sleep. Master Xehanort's ambition remained even after the destruction of his original body, his newer body, his heartless, and his nobody. 4 incarnations of Xehanort have been around, which is why you never begin describing the series to newcomers by saying how many Soras, Kairis, and Xehanorts there have been. All 3 later incarnations of Master Xehanort possessed various aspects of his original persona. Terranort had amnesia after the events of Birth by Sleep, but was eventually drawn to experimenting about hearts and darkness, likely spurred on by Ansem the Wise and Evan's scientific curiosity, alongside Braid's direction, likely at the earlier behest of Master Xehanort. After they all gave into darkness, his sentient heartless, Ansem, Seeker of Darkness, kept his somebody's insatiable need for knowledge. He went so far as to roam the realm of light as nothing more than a cloaked heart for years, directing Heartless after kickstarting Maleficent's obsession with ruling over all hearts and taking the opportunity to unlock the path to the Kingdom Hearts of Worlds. Xemnas had an obsession with finding Aqua and Ventus, even seeing Ven in a sleeping Roxas during that moment in days. He then formed an organization of 13 individual nobodies, still a very specific number, all in an attempt to orchestrate Keyblade wielders from around the shadows in creating an artificial Kingdom Hearts of men in an attempt to create a new world, sharing Master Xehanort's desire to remake the wider world with light and darkness perfectly balanced. Well, maybe not Xemnas, but you get what I mean. As far as Terra is concerned, he and Ericus were seemingly fighting to keep Terra's heart around, despite his will having embodied his Keyblade armor, whom Sora did eventually face in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. A lot of that foreshadowing ended up being pretty accurate as well. Linger Will asked both if Sora was either Aqua or Ven, before settling on not being the one he chose, which was actually Riku. After mistaking Sora for Xehanort, he likely realized it was Ven's heart that he was sensing, remaining in the Badlands for another chance of facing Xehanort. Its rage seemingly destined to remain unsated as it waits in the Keyblade Graveyard for an enemy that no longer exists. And poor Aqua, my favorite character from Birth by Sleep, basically spent a majority of the series in what's essentially hell. Sure, she doesn't need to eat, sleep, or even age in the realm of darkness, but time doesn't flow there, propping up Ansem the Wise's accounts in his secret reports. While his memory was fading, Ansem's obsession with writing his thoughts down and letting his vengeance drive him is what kept him sane before welcoming the darkness as a friend, enabling his first escape from the realm. Aqua instead kept fighting for what was over 11 years in the realm of light time, with events occurring in there that have now been teased as a Volume 2. Let's put a pin in that for now, we will be covering that in a future video in a way. Since Aqua spots what looks to be the Castle of Dreams, it's safe to say that this was after the events of Kingdom Hearts. During Sora's dive to the heart as an effective early tutorial in Kingdom Hearts, the stained glass stations showed Snow White, Cinderella, Aurora, and Belle. These 4 princesses of Heart's worlds were eventually taken over by Heartless before the first game, with the first 3 specifically showcased in Birth by Sleep before they fell. I appreciate the nod to continuity here as someone who's super attentive to timeline shenanigans, so gold star in environmental storytelling, and using the opportunity presented as a prequel. Speaking of people with pure hearts filled with light, let's talk about 2 specific moments to simply cover my bases. First off, Ven is akin to a Princess of Heart in the fact that he as being for 4 years had a heart devoid of any darkness. Not really relevant, but I thought it was kinda neat. Secondly, I've been asked before by people I've introduced Kingdom Hearts to as to why Master Xehanort didn't produce a Heartless and nobody when he extracted his own heart. This is all down to the method. Keyblade Masters can affect aspects of a heart, including extracting all darkness from it, locking them, and transferring their hearts into another vessel. The conditions to producing a Heartless are when someone gives into the darkness in their heart or has it forcibly stolen by a Heartless. Master Xehanort's method is an ability possessed by Keyblade Masters, which is different from how Terranort eventually willingly gave over his heart to the darkness. It's also nice to know that Kairi was pretty much guaranteed to find Sora on Destiny Islands when she was cast off from Radiant Garden by Ansem. While he had discovered that she was a Princess of Heart in the hopes of finding the Keyblade wielder, Aqua's spell ended up having the same effect in practice, of her finding someone else's strong light who would then further protect hers. Speaking of, it's nice to know that the Destiny Trio apparently knows about what happened with the Wayfinder and Sea Salt Trio, as those 6 alongside Naminé are apparently waiting to be saved by Sora. This will be addressed in the next game a little bit, so I'm glossing over this element for now. I guess I'll end this section by addressing that unknown mysterious figure. Considering the first two sequel tease bosses had something to do with who we now know as Master Xehanort, it's safe to assume, as we all did back in 2010, that this enemy is also somehow related in some way. The detailed and specific reasoning circa 8 years ago were the black coat, the ethereal blade-like weapons, his ability to somehow deal with time shenanigans, alongside with No-Name's Keyblade stats grant 6 attack and 7 magic, which equates to 13. This fandom can sometimes be amazing, let me tell you that. Part of the hype after every game is trying to figure out all the clues that we think we're being given, even when it's something as trivial as statistics on a Keyblade with an hourglass as its keychain. Oh, I almost forgot to focus on names. For those who aren't versed in Japanese, the Destiny trio are all named as follows. Sora means sky, Kairi is derived from sea, and Riku means land. Most can already see where I'm heading with this one. In Latin, Terra, Ventus, and Aqua are all names for earth, wind, and water respectively, giving the Wayfinder trio connections to their Destiny trio counterparts. In fact, just like Shion's connection to Naminé and Kairi, Sora's black-haired counterpart also has some complex meanings with his own name. While Vanitas is translated into vanity, it also means emptiness, while in Japanese the name also contains the kanji for Sora within it, so Nomura really lucked out with his other language meanings once again. Also, one final note. In the first secret ending to Kingdom Hearts 2, Terra, Ven, and Aqua are seen approaching the crossroads in the Keyblade Graveyard. To cover one thing, that giant nobody-ass theme that Terra was on never made it into the final game here, so we'll never probably know what that was meant to be, mechanical or not. Secondly, the Keyblades they all selected at the crossroads were all symbolic of their fates. Terra picked up the Kingdom Key, Ventus the Weight of the Dawn, and Aqua the Kingdom Key D. Terra's armor and body were ultimately left in the realm of light. Ven's duality of light and darkness is represented in Riku's Keyblade, while also resting in what is now Castle Oblivion in the realm between, while Aqua has been trapped in the realm of darkness, where Mickey found the Kingdom Key D. Use this trivia I find fun. And with that, I have exhausted pretty much all the relevant and pedantic details for Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep Final Mix. I absolutely adore this game, and it's probably tied alongside Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix as my favorite games in the series. It isn't without its flaws, obviously. It doesn't have 2's flowing combat and smooth controls, granted Days also suffered from this, almost by necessity being a DS game, while Birth by Sleep was a PSP title, but this game always gives me some pretty wonky camera movement in quick circumstances, even in the 2.5 HD remix. The lack of a constant party is also felt more here, where virtually every cutscene is now voiced, though I do acknowledge that the loneliness was somewhat intentional in terms of being a solo act for 95% of the game, seeing how Terra, Ven, and Aqua were only reunited for the beginning, middle, and ending of this story. I also kind of dock the game for keeping the abilities locked behind command melding, but I don't know how much that bothers other people. When I play RPGs, especially Japanese ones, I'm used to using a wiki or a guide for all the nitty-gritty in terms of things like synthesizing things and where drops are. It's important to say that I do consider this more of a nitpick simply because it's exacerbated more in a Proud and Critical mode playthrough, since the bosses and especially super bosses virtually require the usual once more second chance combo. But overall, I do enjoy how they changed the combat here and how it's utilized into the next few games. I generally enjoy how the team basically retooled Chain of Memories' card system and made it more palatable by stripping them of the number game and mixing it in with the series' trademark reflex-based action combat. The deck command allows players to experiment with various forms of playstyles, while still operating on a cooldown system to encourage the use of your customized moves and not relying on an MP meter. It keeps in line with how snappy the gameplay remains, especially within the context of the original game being a handheld title, where it had to be pick up and play. The story is also fast-paced and generally always has a point, in comparison to how Kingdom Hearts 2's cutscenes could sometimes go on for a little bit too long, focusing on a lot of nothing, despite the impressive production values on display. Then again, Birth by Sleep also suffers from the infamous fish face in a lot of scenes, but it was originally on a handheld screen where they, might have thought it wouldn't have been as noticeable by a portion of the audience. It's still more obvious when you blow it up to an HD screen though, despite how much more effort was put into some of the fish faces in certain scenes. At least most of the important shots are the usual lip-synced and detailed faces, and they are all voiced. Another side effect is the size of the worlds. I know it's unfair to compare a PSP game to a PS2 game, but it is a natural reality from a game with this level of fidelity on the handheld. Though this does work to the game's advantage in some degrees, the story's constantly moving, you're never really lost at any point in the world, since at least most rooms are easily identifiable and varied enough from each other, and cutscenes are always directing you into your next objective. And at least it tries its best to have all three leads doing something different in each world, even though inevitable overlap is always going to occur. This isn't really a big ding against the game though, since its pacing, story, and gameplay is largely seen as a fan favorite by a good chunk of the fanbase, myself included. The gameplay systems are addicting as heck for me. There is something psychologically satisfying about seeing meters fill up in a video game, especially when you can see the abilities improve as you defeat various enemies as you do so. I also enjoy how interlinked all the various systems are, and how they have some attempt at some story link, no matter how tenuous. You're always working towards something for the entirety of the critical path, unless you stop and grind, and even when I take 2 to 3 hours in the middle of each campaign to grind abilities, I still don't unlock every finisher by that time. Birth by Sleep is chocked full of various things to do if you want to 100% the game if you're crazy like I am, when it's not my 5th plus playthrough of a game that requires you to essentially do things a minimum of 3 separate times. And even if you don't, the game spaces out a lot of its different set pieces and minigames at a decent pace alongside the unversed variety. And that's all holding up a story that works as a pretty effective prequel. While you will obviously be missing a lot of the subtle connections to the future games on the timeline if this is your first game, Birth by Sleep is understandable for newcomers for like 85% of its runtime. A new playable trio not seen before is a perfect entry point for newcomers, even if it does spoil a few reveals if you begin here. The story is very easy to follow beyond the usual Kingdom Hearts madness that comes with the series. A bunch of cameos are thrown in here as well, which I can understand if someone doesn't recognize who all these characters are, but at least I appreciate how the game doesn't dwell on all the references for too long, while still giving me some bones in the continuity department. And while the game does give a lot of answers to things like the Chambers of Repose and Waking, how all 3 characters aren't shown in the latter games in their normal forms, and setting up the stakes for the series, it doesn't over-explain every answer, and still left plenty of speculation on events and implications. Heck, the why does Vanitas look like Sora explanation isn't something everybody gets the first time around, and Kingdom Hearts is full of moments like that. Visual storytelling is nice when payoffs occur like this. There were certain details that I was able to guess beforehand. For instance, I was on the Terra has to be Xehanort somehow train, and only kinda guessed that Ventus somehow ended up with Sora because of how he's near identical to Roxas, because Keyblades and Heart and stuff, everything I talked about earlier, but others were obvious to me. I didn't realize Mickey Starshard was a warping gummy block at first, as obvious as it seems in Highlight, and I know some didn't realize that Ven was hidden in Castle of Oblivion, or that's where the Land of Departure turned into. It relies on the audience catching the word Oblivion, recognizing the sterile white interior of the chamber, and also remembering what Castle Oblivion looks like from the outside. But that's what I'm here for. I'm doing my best to ensure I prop up what I really enjoyed about this prequel, since I hold it up alongside Metal Gear Solid 3 as some of my favorite prequels in video games. I'd also like to highlight general inconsistencies and problems I had with the game, such as the retcon that was Queen Minnie instead of the King who banished Pete into another dimension, but that's so minor I'm not gonna go nuts over it. It's all about context. Who sent Pete into a dimension as a punishment is such a small thing, alongside things like Donald and Goofy not recognizing Yensid's tower, even though it's established that they have been here before. In this very game, in fact. Granted, I asked the same things and even agreed with some of them, though I can headcanon away that Naminé may have shuffled their memories around a bit and didn't quite put everything back in place, so they may not remember that Yensid's tower after their year-long sleep, and that it could appear in different places in the realm between. But again, that's me inferring an answer based on a possible in-game explanation on an overall minor plot detail in the grand scheme. For example, this game didn't have nobodies running around for no reason, as that would have broken my suspension of disbelief and taken me out of the game, since this series is continuing a storyline from 2002 and is generally good at sticking to as much of its own stories as possible, with various contradictions along the way being an inevitability. Don't worry, there are a little bit more small inconsistencies ahead, since it's inevitable in such an intricate and lore-heavy series such as this one, and I will bring them up as we come across them as best I can, and answering any questions. With Birth by Sleep completed, we are essentially at the halfway point through the current arc, and the closer we get now to the ending here, the more I don't actually have solid answers for all of this. So this is fun, you're going to hear me speculate a lot of stuff. I truly believe that you should be critical on things you dislike to explain why you don't care for something, and especially more for things that you do like. Admitting that you like or love something, even with its flaws, shows that you don't think in absolutes, and I respect all who can do that. Wrapping this up, I very highly recommend Birth by Sleep Final Mix, obviously, as I believe it's a fantastic prequel that newcomers and fans alike can consider their personal favorite entry in the series. Not that this surprises anyone. If you've been following my videos, you can see I enjoy this series as a whole, while acknowledging that they aren't perfect. I tend to enjoy the wild ride these narratives present, and fully dive into its nonsense. I generally cover events and how characters feel about them without actually criticizing how well and not well written they can and are, and that's fair. I'm here to make sure everyone understands what's happening, more so than giving my opinion on what I consider is strictly good in the storytelling, or as what's poorly told in events in this series, and this series is full of needless complications. But at this point, I am all aboard this train. I love seeing what the next plot twist is, even if I see it coming, and I love how committed the series is to setting up the inevitable, convoluted, and no doubt epic conclusion that Kingdom Hearts 3 is promising to be. I tried my best here to express my joy and frustration with the 5th title in this insane series, basically halfway through the Dark Secret Saga at this point, and I hope to see you guys in the Recoded video. We're almost done with the context needed before entering the final act of this current story arc, so I'll see you in the Datascape.